בחרמון נמס השלג בחצי הלילה, בחרמון זורם לו פלג בחצי הליל. אבא שם על הר השלג בחצי הלילה, שר שירים על נס בפלא עם כל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. בבקעת תמר פורח בחצי הלילה, הירח שם זורח בחצי הליל. שם אחי ודאי שומע בחצי הלילה את שירנו השמח כאן בישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. במדבר הולך החושך בחצי הלילה, שקט הס בארץ גושן בחצי הליל. לדודי עיני נחושת בחצי הלילה, וגם הוא חוגג כמו שכל בית ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. ואני יושב בבית בחצי הלילה, עם נרות וגביע יין בחצי הליל, וכוכב מאיר עיניים בחצי הלילה, לי מוסר ברכת שמיים ולכל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. שוב צוהל.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар.
Future sun.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 994 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again, as today we're hearing the Russians are revolting, and also Ukraine is threatening Russia with a nuclear weapon. And we have very big news today, and it's good to see you all once again.
And, of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, but particularly tonight, we are going to be focusing on the war in Ukraine, as we are starting to hear news that is absolutely crazy. And many of y'all have been able to see this in the title, and this story has been corroborated and backed up not only by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense itself, the Ukrainian central government, but also major news organizations around the world. The story is 100% legitimate. The Ukrainians are threatening that without U.S. support, they are going to develop a nuclear weapon on their own in less than 2 months and possibly field it against the Russian Federation, either in some form of an armed standoff to force them into diplomatic concessions, or they will actually use against the Russian Federation's armed forces on the battlefield. This has been corroborated by multiple sources today and is probably one of the most interesting developments of the conflict that we've been able to see so far. It is an incredibly bizarre one, to say the least, because we, of course, have not seen this one coming. It literally hit everyone like a gut punch today that this statement was made. At the exact same time, outside of Kyiv, we have been able to hear that deep inside of the Russian Siberian region, within the city of Novosibirsk, a Russian revolt is currently underway by a group of soldiers at one of the bases in this area. We do not know the exact reasons why they are revolting, but this has been making the rounds on the internet today, and it does seem as though multiple clips and pictures, we are only showing one at the moment though, have been emerging showing that this entire base has pretty much fallen into a state of anarchy and may as well be a modern-day version of the Potemkin, at least with the amount of soldiers that are involved in the uprising against their Russian commanders. Meanwhile,
And their uprising because their odds just came in, and their odds are worse than a Georgia lottery ticket at this point. Like, the odds of them going in and living is not very good at this point.
Man, I'm telling you what, it's not good odds, but I think that the odds of them wrecking the base and most likely getting some form of corporal punishment is also fairly low at this point, considering how many of them are involved. Meanwhile, inside the Middle East, we have been able to see that Saudi forces taking direct action against the Yemeni Houthis today near to their border, once again ensuring that the Houthis do not cross into Saudi Arabia and begin to threaten the Saudi Arabian citizenry, which do have security backings by the United States. We have also been able to see that Israeli interceptors have been hard at work today over the area of Tel Aviv, as well as the port of Eilat within the most southern area of Israel, as missiles have been flying once again towards Israel today from proxy forces. We believe that the Yemeni Houthis and Hezbollah were responsible for the rockets that were fired over just the past few hours. Meanwhile, outside of Israel and in other areas of the world, we have been able to hear that inside of Poland, a brand new American missile defense base has been opened up along Poland's coastline, most likely to protect the Polish and the Germans from incoming Russian missiles if they were to be fired from the Kaliningrad Oblast or from Russian submarines operating within the Baltic Sea. We have also been able to see heavy combat action in the area of the Kursk Oblast, Vovchansk, as well as the areas around Chasiv Yar, the Severonsky Forest, and Pokrovsk, as the Ukrainians have been continuing to try and hold the Russian Federation at bay and stop them from making any further advances. Today's news is some of the largest that we've been able to see, and that's not even mentioning all of the news topics that we have to cover tonight, including the death of a Black Sea Fleet captain inside the city of Sevastopol from a car bombing. And it appears that some Ukrainian partisans are taking some lessons from the folks who sung "Come Out, You Black Interns." But nevertheless, we are going to be getting into the major news tonight. And we are going to be moving into probably one of the largest pieces of news that we have heard of the entire war. Many people have been getting an idea that we may be entering the end phase of this war, and it does seem as though everyone in the conflict, the Ukrainians and the Russians included, are starting to clearly make this the case that they are getting towards the end of the conflict, and they're trying to do any actions necessary to be able to get themselves an upper hand advantage in regards to dealing with the other side. And the Ukrainians today have put out one of the craziest propositions that I have seen so far on dealing with this matter. And I'm actually going to be pulling up the two separate sources that we have for this, because we just want to make sure that everyone knows that this isn't some kind of a clickbait thing. This is actually something that was reported by multiple news organizations, because for some reason, the Enforcer channel as a standalone is not a worthy or reliable news agency, at least according to YouTube, due to recent action that they took. So we're going to be making sure to back this up by multiple sources. The Times said that Ukraine can make a nuke in months if U.S. support stops. We also were able to hear from Clash Report a much more in-depth statement that was made by the Times, or specifically by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. But according to what they have today, a briefing prepared for Ukraine's Ministry of Defense suggests Ukraine could develop a basic nuclear bomb within months if U.S. military support is withdrawn. Using plutonium extracted from spent reactor fuel, Ukraine could potentially construct a weapon similar in design to the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. According to Oleksiy Yezhak of Ukraine's National Institute for Strategic Studies, Ukraine has enough nuclear plutonium to make hundreds of low-yield warheads capable of targeting military bases or critical infrastructure inside of the Russian Federation. It does.
Now, I wonder where in the world they get the plutonium for that. Are they saying they got it from maybe like the byproduct of a nuclear reactor? Or did they procure it from somebody?
Apparently, they are getting it from the byproducts of their own nuclear reactors. They're not procuring this from anyone else. This is entirely the nuclear fuel supply caches that the Ukrainians have to be able to run their nuclear reactors. They actually have one of the largest nuclear fuel caches in the world, considering that Ukraine has some of the largest numbers of operational nuclear reactors inside of their borders compared to really almost any other country on Earth at the moment, except for France and the United States. So, given that in mind, we do understand that the Ukrainians are certainly saying this with the ability to do such a thing, and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense is giving a fairly good note, at least at the moment, that if they think the situation is getting desperate, they're going to be producing a nuclear weapon, or maybe even more than a singular nuclear weapon, to counter the Russian Federation in the conflict. I cannot say this enough. It's something in my opinion I have to say is that nuclear weaponry being created on a whim is not necessarily a good thing, and also allowing this to slide is not necessarily a good thing. There is a concept in the world that currently sits called nuclear non-proliferation, if I can speak English. Nuclear nonproliferation is the idea that the countries that were able to possess nuclear arms by the time that treaty is made are the only countries that will be able to possess nuclear arms in the future, and every single other country is denied the ability to possess or produce nuclear armaments and weapons for their own individual purposes. This largely relegates the amount of nuclear weapons to a far smaller number, or usually to countries that are somewhat more stable, although the Russian Federation and North Korea certainly are not stable countries, but still, nevertheless, the idea is that it's supposed to make sure that global tensions don't remain high, and an unstable government, possibly put in a very bad position, may start to just fling nuclear weapons around left and right to be able to really do whatever they want. The fact that the Ukrainians are proposing that they are producing a nuclear weapon has brought up, well, possibly going to produce a nuclear weapon, has brought about a great deal of concern here in the West, and it's also brought about a great deal of concern here on this channel, considering that it's a violation of international treaties, and not only that, we don't really know if they would immediately start using nuclear weapons on the field. And one does have to understand that just because they use a nuclear weapon, such as a tactical-sized nuclear weapon on the Russians, that doesn't mean that the Russians are going to take that idly. They will start to nuke Ukraine in return, and then we're going to have not only a conventional war on the European continent, it could easily, well, actually, it probably would naturally evolve into a nuclear conflict on the European continent, the first of its kind in the world and its history, and certainly not one that would be as nice as an of an option as a conventional war.
Now, Enforcer, am I correct in saying this? Because this is my current assessment of the situation, is that Ukraine would encounter almost the exact same problem that Iran is facing. Even though they could develop a nuclear warhead of sorts or a primitive nuclear weapon, they necessarily would not have an effective delivery system to actually send it across to Russia to actually hit their territory. Is that true with Ukraine, or is it a little bit different?
They do actually have the ability to fire it into the Russian Federation, if that's what you're asking. Sorry, I'm trying to pay attention to 90 things. Could you restate that again?
I was saying basically, would they have the same problem that Iran is facing? Because right now, Iran is rumored and probably has already developed some sort of primitive nuclear weapon, but they're lacking a launch system or a delivery system to actually send it over into Israel. So I was wondering, is Ukraine facing the same problem? Do they have a delivery system that could launch it far enough to actually be effective, or would they have to develop one from scratch like Iran has to do?
From what we understand, they do have a delivery system, or at least a very close to finished delivery system that would be able to use this in the GROM or the HRIM intermediate range ballistic missile. The HROMs and the GRIMs are practically Iskanders, and Iskanders can be mounted with a small nuclear warhead. Iskanders are usually used in their conventional form, though, currently in the war in Ukraine, and we've never seen one mounted with a nuclear warhead, but still, the Ukrainians could easily also mount a nuclear warhead on their HROM or GRIM missile systems, and they could start to fire those into the Russian Federation, or they could try and crudely create some form of a nuclear warhead that could be mounted onto different kinds of weaponry, possibly an American-made piece of weaponry. You know, not to say that they would do that, but considering that they would be using a nuclear weapon at that point, we would be considering that they would probably be acting in desperation, and so may actually make it to be mounted onto a long-range ATACMS that has been provided by the United States, which will also have the range to be able to hit key strategic targets throughout the Russian Federation. I generally will have to say that it is a very interesting kind of a thing that we're hearing, that they are going to be seriously considering creating a nuclear weapon here in the next few months. It's also even crazier to hear that that's being leaked out by the Ukrainian government to the public, as we are seeing today from multiple different news sources. It has literally been reported everywhere, and I just want to make sure that we do our due diligence here to make sure that y'all know that this truly is being reported everywhere, because some people may be going, oh, I didn't hear about that today, that must not be real. Let me make sure that I get y'all this right here. So let me see if I can go and find the additional source that we have. And let's see here. It should be somewhere around here. Here we go. Here's another article from the Times talking about it. And we also have, and let me see if I can find the additional ones. We had 3 different sources for this on Twitter today, and that's the only reason why we're reporting on it, is because there was 3 different sources saying the exact same things, which led us to believe that this is 100% a verified story. And we're also seeing that there was a specific person in the Ukrainian government that made these statements that was quoted in every single publication. And considering the news qualifications on on this channel in that we have to have video and picture evidence of the actual instance happening, or we have to have an official government statement from a government official of some nation. This does fit the bill. It actually meets the third test, and for that reason, it is actually applicable and valid news. Nevertheless, it is a very big question whether Ukraine is starting to cross a line here that they shouldn't cross. One has to keep in mind that wielding a nuclear weapon wielding a nuclear weapon, to use the proper word, is something that isn't done lightly. Nuclear weapons are very dangerous. I don't think a lot of people may understand the gravity of that, considering that the word nuclear is thrown around on YouTube like candy, and people are telling folks that nuclear bombers are flying every day and everyone's about to get nuked every day. I don't really think it's carrying the weight that nuclear weapons used to carry back when their mention was something that was fairly scary. The fact that a country can have or possess nuclear weapons is something that down the line might not be the best idea. Some countries are a little bit more unstable and may be prone to flipping in terms of their government, or may end up having a fairly unstable government. Some people who may be our friends right now, so a couple of decades down the line, might not be our friends in the future. And the problem with that is that they are no longer our friends, and they are now nuclear armed. And that's something that has to seriously be considered when talking about something like this, because we don't really know if the Ukrainians are seriously weighing out the option here of producing and fielding a nuclear weapon. There also has not been the consideration that just the statement of this, which I don't know why the statement would be made publicly today by a Ukrainian government official, but the statement alone could panic the Russians enough to where they start to conduct preemptive tactical nuclear strikes on Ukrainian forces on the battlefield before they're ever able to have a usable nuclear weapon, meaning that it escalated into a nuclear conflict without really the necessity to do so, and now the United States is forced with the option of responding to the Russians, considering that they started a nuclear war, or sitting back and letting the Ukrainians get steamrolled through a tactical nuclear barrage by the Russians. Either way, this is a very concerning statement that was made today, and it seems as though many people have been having a whole bunch of input on this, on whether they think this was a good idea or not. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so now that we have gotten a new report suggesting that Ukraine might develop a nuclear bomb within months if U.S. aid comes to an end or starts decreasing, what are your thoughts? So 56% of the audience said that's a good idea because that ensures Ukraine's security, while 29% said that's a bad idea, no more nuclear proliferation, and 6% said I'm somewhat indifferent on it. And on this one, I got to say, I think I understand why Ukraine would do this, and I want to make it clear up front. I think Ukraine is actually bluffing on this. I think Ukraine probably does have the ability to develop a nuclear weapon, but I think they're bluffing, and their intent behind it is twofold. They're trying to scare Russia into thinking that they will have a way to defend themselves in the future, even if U.S. aid ends, and they're also trying to get the West and pressure the West to give more aid to Ukraine, so that way it doesn't stop, because I don't think the West wants Ukraine to be a nuclear power once again, and that might coerce the West into giving more aid to Ukraine instead of ending it. So that's I believe, the objective behind it, but I think that's going to backfire on them just a little bit, because like the enforcer said, the Russians use this as a propaganda point. If Ukraine's developing a nuclear weapon, that gives Russia all the propaganda excuse they need to be able to go down there and then try to eliminate that threat inside of Ukraine by going even harder in the war, and maybe even threatening their own nuclear weapons on Ukraine as well. So that's not good on that front, and also that might end up pissing the West off as well if they're trying to use that as a coercive tactic against the Western governments. That might piss them off and cause them to end support even quicker. So I understand like where they might be coming from by doing this, but ultimately I don't think it's a good idea, and I'm with the 29%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm seeing where a lot of people are coming from with the idea that it's a wonderful and amazing idea, but allow me to explain something that is a little bit more nuanced to understand. You cannot denuclearize a country once it has nuclear weapons. There's no way to do that. A country getting and possessing a nuclear weapon is an irreversible action. Once it happens, there's no way to reverse it. And a lot of people seem to be thinking a little bit in the short term at the moment. But allow me to remind all of y'all that if if the state of Ukraine gets a nuclear weapon, it's not the country of Ukraine, it's the state of Ukraine, that's their official name, gets a nuclear weapon, and then possibly hundreds of them, they are technically at that point in a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that pretty much every single major nuclear power is a signing member of. That is a little bit of a big deal, because that technically means, much like with North Korea and possibly Iran here in the future, they are in violation of all treaties that exist about who can possess a nuclear weapon. And that does mean that there will probably be, by default, major economic and military consequences to come from that, such as them being sanctioned into oblivion by pretty much everyone in the world. Another thing that a lot of people aren't really thinking about, at least right now, because I know a lot of people are thinking on the short term, and it sounds great to go, well, no one looked after their security, let's give them nukes, or let them build a nuke. But the issue with this is that once they get a nuke, we don't know what Ukraine is going to look like in 20 years. Let's say that the war ends and they end up like let's just say in this scenario, just to give you all a little bit of the double-edged sword here, let's say that they end the war and they end up giving up all of the territory that the Russians hold right now. I'm not saying that it'll happen, but let's just say hypothetically that it would, just for the sake of this one scenario. So they give up the territory, and this embitters a great deal of Ukrainians, and yet they still have nuclear weapons. And going on in the future, this bitterness that the Ukrainians have towards the Russians turns into radicalism. A new radical government is elected that starts to seize democratic rights inside of the country and then forms itself as a dictatorship. And then we see a very unstable government inside of Ukraine in the future that isn't Western aligned, it isn't Russian aligned, but it sure as hell is nuclear armed. And now it's a major threat to anyone on the European continent about 20 years down the line. That's not to say that that would happen, and that's not what I'm wanting people to work off of here, but we always have to remember that countries being nuclear armed is a double-edged sword. It's not always a great thing. If it was a great thing, we would see that literally every country in the Western world would have at least one nuclear weapon. It's not
well, Enforcer, I will say this real quick, not to interrupt the point, but just to make a quick point. I've been seeing people making the live chat, and it is somewhat of a good point. The people are saying that Ukraine has had nuclear weapons before. They're not a stranger to nuclear weapons, but they did give them up in exchange for security agreements. I believe it was the Minsk Accords. Am I correct in that? That's the proper name for it, I believe.
Let's see, the Minsk Accords, the Minsk Treaty was, I think, something to do with the war in the Donbass.
Budapest Memorandum, that's it. I got it mixed up with the other one. But they agreed to give up the nukes for security. And obviously, we see how that went. It's kind of like sort of being honored and sort of not being honored at the same time. It's kind of a weird little situation there with that. But they have had nukes before, and they didn't really go necessarily haywire with them. Now, I will say, I'm personally not in favor of nuclear proliferation in any form whatsoever. But at the same time, if it came down to it, let's say Ukraine's survival depended on having that nuclear weapon, or otherwise, the USA has totally ended, and Russia is steamrolling through Ukraine. So would you say in that scenario, which appears to be the scenario Ukraine's talking about, would you support them having the nuclear weapon, or simply just let the history take fold, basically?
That's a tough one. And also on top of that, if they get a nuclear weapon, I'm not really seeing where that would go too well, like, to be entirely honest. Like, if they get a nuclear weapon, does that really ensure their survival, or does that more so certainly assure their demise at that point? Because if they're producing a nuclear weapon as an act of desperation, it would be logical to assume that they are producing it to immediately use the weapon. If they use one tactical nuclear weapon on a Russian army group somewhere inside of Ukraine, I'm fairly certain that the Russians will be lobbing about 10 of them back towards Ukraine within the next hour or two, immediately. And then we would see that the Ukrainians got off, I guess you could say, one last little bravura right there by slinging one tactical nuke at them, but they got all of their army groups wiped out, literally almost simultaneously, by Russian tactical nuclear strikes, and then they don't have the ability to produce any more nuclear weapons. So I don't really know if that is a good idea, and also a lot of people aren't really thinking in the metric here. No one is a winner, particularly Ukraine, in a hypothetical scenario like this with nuclear weapons. If the Russians get hit with a nuclear weapon, there is going to be, even if it's a little boy-sized nuclear weapon, it's still going to have a large amount of destruction behind it. It's going to cause a great deal of lives to be lost, hundreds of thousands most likely to be wounded within the area, maybe tens of thousands, and that will generally be an absolute crisis. Then in response to that, the Russians are going to drop enough tactical tactical nuclear weapons on the Ukrainian armed forces to make sure that practically the entire armed forces wiped out in any meaningful way, and Russian forces can just advance through the fallout and through the other side pretty much unopposed at that point. It doesn't sound to me like it would be a sound idea. And I know a lot of people are going to be saying, well, they have a nuke. Yes, but if we're once again going off the idea they're producing one as an act of desperation, they're not doing that to hold on to it and have it for strategic deterrence. It generally would probably be used immediately to strike at the Russians. And there's no way that they can win. They don't have the ability to produce nuclear weapons in scale. They don't even have a big enough a number of them right now to be able to say, or when they finally use this thing, they don't have a big enough number of them behind that one to say, the rest of them are coming, or to at least assure mutually assured destruction on a tactical level. They would not be able to do that. And so I don't really know if I'm actually a fan of a nuclear weapon being produced or used by the Ukrainians. I know a lot of people are saying that it sounds like a great idea, but no matter how you game that out, there's many ways that that could go wrong. Even if they have a entirely stable government well into the future, which I would assume that they will, it still doesn't seem in the short term it would be a good idea, much less in the long term, and what could be happening with that. Not only that, we somehow have to get every single country in the world in the future on board with the idea of Ukraine being a signer in future nuclear non-proliferation treaties, which would be pretty difficult because, from what I understand, North Korea has never been included in a non-proliferation treaty because literally no one agrees with them having a nuclear weapon. And so I would highly doubt that anyone knew, even if it was Ukraine, would be allowed to keep nuclear weapons without suffering some form of economic consequence, like sanctions or such things like that. So I would have to say, I don't really know about this one. And I see some people giving pushback, but this is something I don't think a lot of people are thinking out when you're giving pushback to what I'm saying here. It's a nuclear weapon. It's not a smart idea to just let everyone start producing nuclear weapons. Not only that, what does that show to other countries around the world if we were to just allow Ukraine to have a nuclear weapon, much less we're already pretty much allowing Iran to develop their own nuclear weapon, which is a disaster in its own right. Now we're going to be allowing a second example of a country just producing a nuclear weapon and pretty much fielding it with really no discernible consequence. How many more countries at that point are going to start producing nuclear weapons, and then we're going to have unstable governments around the entirety of the world clearly believing, because a precedent has been laid out at this point, that they can produce a nuclear weapon and no one's going to come to stop them, and then they can use that nuclear weapon really against anyone on a diplomatic or an actual physical level with really no consequence to be seen from that point forward. That is something that I generally have to say it doesn't seem like that great of an idea. And I also see some people saying you need to understand nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence is to generally avoid a war, because if I want to remind everyone here, nuclear deterrence works before a war has broken out. There's a big difference in between when a war is currently ongoing and before a war is broken out. That's why in the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States never fought each other directly. You didn't sit there and see the Soviet Union and the United States, pretty much the entirety of NATO, steamrolling each other in the middle of Europe from the 1950s all the way up until the end of the 1980s, because they were scared if it turns into a war, a conventional war, nuclear weapons are going to be rolling out in droves not that long after, on the tactical level and then on the strategic level after that. That's why no major war broke out in between the Soviet Union and the United States, is because they were scared of the nuclear weapon. That's a very different...
Enforcer, I think the difference here would be this from what I'm personally seeing. I think Ukraine is looking to develop a nuclear weapon because they want to use it as a weapon of last resort, basically like a dead man's trigger in case Russia did start steamrolling through their territory after U.S. aid presumably ended. They would have some way to say, like, if you go any further and cross this red line into our territory, then we will lob this nuke at Moscow and destroy it completely. I personally do not think they're trying to get the nukes to go on the offensive, like, for example, lob it immediately at Russia, and then Russia exchange a nuke back with them, because obviously Russia outnumbers them tremendously. Even if half their nukes are bad and they don't work properly in Russia, they still have way more than Ukraine will ever have, no matter how Ukraine manufactures a nuclear weapon. So I think they would simply have it simply as a safeguard, like a last-ditch attempt to save their country, because I think the way they see it is, if they can't have their own country and their own sovereignty, then nobody's going to have it. I think that's the way they're kind of looking at it right now. And I know some people are going to criticize that. I understand the sentiment. I still personally don't think this is the right way to go about it, because I think they're going to ultimately end up pissing off the West by doing this, because the West is not stupid. Like, we see what they're doing here by doing this. They're trying to coerce the West into not ending support, so that way that dilemma does not happen. And to be honest, I don't think we're ever going to really get to the point where Ukraine really has to face this possibility. I don't think U.S. aid is actually going to end. So this is probably just going to be simply a hypothetical. It'll probably never come to fruition, but hopefully it never does, because it's going to be a very tricky situation indeed.
It's going to be a pretty tricky one, and I see where people are coming from with an idea of having nuclear weapons, but I'm going to be honest. I see some people in the chat, and I'm going to just be very frank. It's not a large number, but it's a few that don't understand the gravity of a nuclear weapon and a country fielding one or using it. It completely freezes any kind of diplomatic situation that country is involved in, because there's no way to move forward if you need to, because now they're nuclear armed. And I'm trying to make that as clear as possible, the gravity of the situation of having a nuclear weapon, even just one. And I'm seeing some people say, deter aggression. Let me explain really quickly what I was trying to get to a second ago. I've told you all about the Cold War and how a war was avoided altogether because both sides were nuclear armed. As far as the war in Ukraine goes, the war is going on right now. They're not creating a nuclear weapon to stand off the Russians and stop a war from starting. They are in a war. There's a very big difference. If you were creating a nuclear weapon in a war off of the concept that U.S. support is going to end, which the Ukrainians have admitted in the past is the only reason that Ukraine has been able to keep fighting for this long, and you say if U.S. support ends, which logically we would assume they are in a much worse position militarily, we are going to create a nuclear weapon, that sounds more so as in we are going to create the nuclear weapon as a deterrent that if the Russians continue to fight the war, which they're currently already fighting, we're going to nuke them somewhere on the battlefield. That is the most logical kind of scenario that can be made there. And that's not trying to, make it sound like it's a terrible thing or anything like that. But that's the kind of situation that we would most likely be looking at with a logical conclusion. They're not going to be conducting a deterrent to go, we're going to face down the Russians. Where? On the battlefield where they're actually fighting right now, there's nowhere to face them down diplomatically, because a nuclear weapon isn't an actual weapon of war, at least with how they've been used historically. They're always a diplomatic tool to remind someone, whoa, I wouldn't go all the way because we have a way to end everything. So don't go all the way in or we'll end it all. That was the general threat behind a nuclear weapon. When you're creating one in the middle of an ongoing war, there's a little bit more of a different message being made there. But I still get, though, why the Ukrainians would want to produce a nuclear weapon or why they would consider possibly fielding one, but I generally think producing one before the end of this year, if they were to start moving down that route, would be a little jumping the gun, in my opinion. We don't really know if the United States is going to cut support for them. It honestly looks to me like we probably are not, because diplomatic relations in between the president-elect and the Russian Federation are literally falling apart as each day goes by. So I would highly
honestly, Enforcer, if Ukraine really wanted to pursue this route of having a nuclear weapon as a final deterrent factor against Russia, it seems like the logical way to have done it would to be basically create the nuclear weapon first and then announce it after you finished it and you have a functioning primitive nuclear weapon. Then you would say, okay, look, folks, we're saying this to the West and we're saying this to the Russian government. We now have a nuclear weapon and it's in our possession and we're able to use it when we need to. And you'd be wise not to mess with us, Russia, because if you push us too far, we are going to use that weapon. And at that point, I don't think Russia's going to start lobbing nukes. At that point, they're going to be thinking, oh, crap. They might have a delivery system, and they might be able to send that right over to Moscow, and we might be in trouble. I think that would have been the better way to approach it, but now Ukraine's in a bit of a different situation, because now Russia's thinking, oh, well, we have like a couple months now to stop this. Like, we could go in there and have a reason to go in there and actually stop the development of a nuclear weapon, and all they've done now is given Russia the propaganda excuse to escalate the war even further.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. But another thing that I do have to throw out here is that the idea of deterrence is kind of thrown out of the window. Like, generally, in my opinion, if they were to make one right now. And that's because every single nuclear doctrine in the world is a defensive doctrine. And every single doctrine, the Russians, ours, and China's, if their national sovereignty is threatened by an invading force, that is justification to fire off a nuclear weapon at the invading force. That is always a justification. The Russian Federation actually, technically, would be within their rights to drop a tactical nuclear weapon on the Ukrainians in Kursk, because technically, if they really wanted to stretch the definition, their national sovereignty is in an existential crisis because of a Ukrainian invasion of their territory. They technically could justify something like that if they wanted to. It would not hold over well with anyone, considering how big the scope of this invasion was. But still, the Ukrainians certainly have an argument to say that. Around 20% of their country right now is occupied by the Russian Federation. They would easily be able to say, we have a defensive nuclear doctrine. And working down the list, our sovereignty is being threatened by the Russian Federation. They've openly claimed they want to dismantle the Ukrainian state. They are currently invading our country and control 20% of it. Their armies are beginning to move forward due to a lack of U.S. support. For this reason, we nuke them. And they launch a tactical nuke at some Russian army group in the area. And that would be an actual diplomatically, legally justifiable response to do something like that. And then the Russians have a diplomatic justification to return fire with their own tactical nuclear weapons at that point, because they're saying they have now fired a tactical nuke at us. We have I think it's some sort of a doctrine of return fire. Well, it's a defensive doctrine, so they can only use nuclear weapons when fired upon. Ukraine is in a situation diplomatically where they can fire a tactical nuke at Russian occupying forces, and then the Russians would have the justification to fire back. That's largely how that would work, at least on like a diplomatic chain reaction sort of ordeal. And even still, it doesn't end up well. And I would generally say it doesn't end up well if the United States stops supporting Ukraine. I honestly am doubting that we will, and I think that this may be a little bit of preparing for the worst, and we don't even know if the worst is coming around. Like, I'll be completely frank with y'all, the general idea that we're getting from the United States government at the moment with the upcoming cabinet appointments is that the Secretary of Defense appointment, which was made, I think, yesterday, or actually today, I believe, seems to be really anti-Russian, to the point that they were actually encouraging direct U.S. involvement around, I believe it was about a year ago or so, and it looks as though they're not going to be that much of a pushover, or at least the incoming leadership of the United States isn't going to be a massive pushover and just give up Ukraine to the Russians. I believe that might not be the case, at least with what we're seeing right now, but still, that would be my take. Also, I do have to say, a lot of people do have a very fair point, and I'm seeing this one a good deal, about the Budapest Memorandum and how everyone pretty much backed out of it. Russia, the UK, and the United States were all not really signatories. They were all agreeers to the memorandum. Memorandums are not binding, unlike treaty, but from what we understand, they were all agreeers to the Budapest Memorandum, which said if the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons, they would all guarantee Ukraine's security and ensure that they were not invaded. Then the Russians invaded, and then the United States and the UK just sat by and watched it happen, and really didn't do a lot to actively get involved to assure their security beyond material support and thoughts and prayers. So I see what a lot of people are saying with that, is that they have violated the outlines of the memorandum, and for that reason, it's null and void, and the Ukrainians can get nuclear weapons. But even still, there is a little bit more diplomatic rigmarole. They weren't supposed to have nuclear weapons in the first place because they were not a signer of any non-proliferation treaties, and they didn't inherit the title of the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union collapsed. The Russian Federation did. So according to the treaties, the Russian Federation could possess nuclear weapons, but Belarus, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and all of the Stand Series countries could not possess nuclear weapons because they were not the inheritor of the title of the Soviet Union once the Soviet Union collapsed, meaning that any of them that possessed nuclear weapons were in illegal possession of them, according to international law and treaty. So
it's a really tricky situation because on one side of things, for the people that said allowing Ukraine to develop that nuclear weapon and supporting them in the development of it, not necessarily the U.S. coming in and saying, oh, we're going to give you recipes for like the uranium enrichment and stuff like that, but simply saying, okay, if you need to make a nuke, then go right ahead and we'll just stand by and let you do it. That would ensure Ukrainian security in some form or another, not all the way, because it has its risks associated with doing that, but Russia would think twice before before going any further into Ukraine if they did have the nuclear weapon. And I can also see an argument they might decide to escalate, but now they're going to probably try to escalate now as they know they have some time before they can actually finish development of the nuke. But if they had held off and not announced it and simply developed the thing, they would have had a good argument for deterrence. But I think, though, it's a hard argument because most people understand nuclear proliferation is not good whatsoever because, like you mentioned, country leadership does change from time to time. And when you have nuclear weapons at their disposal, sometimes a madman can get in charge and things really go south. But at the same time, though, if it comes down between Ukraine's survival or them having a nuclear weapon, I don't know. Like, that's a tough one. To me, I think I'm going to say we can't let Ukraine fall. If we let Ukraine fall, Russia can fight Ukraine. I'm now that they do that every single day. Either we can give Ukraine the ability to make the nuke and do it, and you need to if it gets to that point, or otherwise Ukraine is going to fall and we could have a much worse situation on our hands.
That may be the case, and also, by the way, Matthew, that entire call was breaking up the entire time, but I got the general understanding of it. But I would agree, it is a very tough call to make, and really I'm trying to make sure to let y'all know, because I still haven't even gotten to really my answer on the poll yet, what the gravity of the situation is. If we were to see that the Ukrainians were in a truly desperate situation, and this was really the only way to try and make a last-ditch attempt at standing off the Russians and stopping them from achieving total victory inside of Ukraine, I would generally say that I would back up the decision, although it would be reluctantly, because it's opening Pandora's box globally, and that's what I'm trying to make clear here by going out of all of the rabbit holes and hypotheticals. It's opening up Pandora's box, and it's one that will not be closed once it's opened for Ukraine and for the entirety of the world. So with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, at least in my opinion. But we wanted to give this a lot of airtime tonight because it is a very serious topic, considering that this is being brought up by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and also Ministry of Defense officials. And it looks as though this may end up becoming a bit more serious than we were originally believing. But nevertheless,
and I tell you what's so hot, it burned down the Discord lines, man. I'll tell you what. By the way, folks, I've got a network adapter coming tomorrow and also a Cat6 Ethernet cable. So rest assured that will definitely fix the problem because otherwise I don't know what else we can possibly fix to fix it. So tomorrow should be the big day.
Hopefully so. And also now the call is coming through fine. I truly do think it's something to do with your Wi-Fi connection because Discord on my end was 100% connected to you. Like it was literally perfectly smooth. So I think it is something to do with the internet. But moving on from that and out of this area in Ukraine, it's actually time for us to move all the way into the Russian Federation because we've actually been able to hear some very interesting news coming out of the middle of Russia because it seems as though the Russian soldiers didn't really need any news about what was going on with the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense today to be able to have a reason to revolt. We are starting to see that there is some sort of a general mutiny going on at a military base in Novosibirsk, which appears to be somewhat serious, but here is a short clip from Novosibirsk showing a part of this soldier revolt, best way to put it. Oh! He seems pretty happy with it.
Базара нет.
Dude, and he was wearing the Adidas tracksuit. This makes this more legitimate. Like, it's 100% legit. But nevertheless, we are starting to see that at least within this one military base in Novosibirsk, it appears that a large majority of the base is in some form of a mutiny. We don't know if this is spreading throughout the area or throughout the Russian Federation. We generally believe that this is more so of an isolated incident within the city of Novosibirsk, but it is still a very interesting one. We haven't seen outright revolts like that often. Usually we see some sort of a petition or a letter being made by soldiers at the front, but we never really see any kind of an action by the Russian soldiers where they're openly and violently forming a uprising against their command and refusing to follow orders, much like we're seeing right there. It's a very interesting kind of a thing, and we are going to be waiting to see if that spreads outside of Novosibirsk, but for now, once again, it does appear to be an isolated incident, and we are assuming that it will most likely remain an isolated incident on into the future. But moving on,
and what is What a goofy logic as well. Like the soldiers think that smashing stuff and going on a riot is going to stop them from going to the front line. Like if anything, I think the Russians are going to expedite them to the front line. Like they're going right now. Like within the next couple of hours, they got to get those guys out there because of course they're just cannon fodder. They're not actually like strategic troops. They're just getting sent out there to basically be sacrifices. So I don't know what those guys are thinking. That's not going to stop them from getting deployed.
Yeah, I don't know why in the world they're thinking that that's going to help them out. It's like they're going to just be brought to a firing squad. Honestly, it's like they're getting like the speed run to just being executed somehow. But still, it is an interesting to see. And if this doesn't spread, we have a feeling that this is going to be crushed pretty quickly. Still a very rare thing to see. We don't see it openly happen like that often or really at all, but still, it is interesting to see. Moving on from that, though, and into the area of Penza inside of the Russian Federation near to the Volga River, we were able to see that an oil depot was hit today, and we were able to see some video footage of this as the fire burned quite brightly in the distance near to Penza. And we can see them showing the oil depot. And you can actually see the fire damage right there from the drone that impacted it.
And man, I'll tell you what, someone said on the video earlier today that the barrel was actually empty. It never had any oil in it. I could have sworn, though, that I was told in the report that it had oil in it, and when the drone hit the thing, it impacted it, it penetrated the side of the oil barrel, and then some of it caught fire. But some people were swearing up and down it was never full of oil whatsoever, so I'm not sure as to the exact situation here. You really can't tell from the picture, but the report I had heard was it did have some oil in it and it caught fire at some point.
And it is interesting to hear that there are different stories going around. We didn't see a visible fire at the oil depot, but it was clearly hit. And also we are understanding that this is somewhere around where some nuclear warheads used to be assembled. Used to be. They're not currently being assembled in this area anymore. But some people are wondering what kind of damage was caused at Penza. Well, it depends. And we really don't know how much damage was really caused, but we are going to be seeing that this oil depot has at least one tank that is out of action on into the future. But moving on out of the Penza area and on into the area outside of the Russian Federation and on into Poland, we have also been able to hear of some very interesting occurrences around the area of Słupsk, which is a Polish town near to the coast on the Baltic Sea. We were able to hear that the United States military has opened up a new U.S. Navy missile defense base inside of Poland. And there it is right there. You can actually see a little baseball field on that base. Really nice. They actually, spared no expense on the production of this base. And if I remember correctly, it is near Słupsk. And it is. It's literally right there. And so there it is. We actually have a viewer that's at this base right now. And it was, according to what we heard, just opened today during a ceremony on Wednesday. The base is a broader missile defense shield dubbed the Aegis Ashore, which was designed to detect, track, and intercept ballistic missiles in flight. It is a fairly interesting kind of a system, and you can actually see one of the main Aegis Ashore arrays here in a second. I'll be able to show you all that right here. And I'm going to be honest with y'all, one thing that's really interesting to me about the Aegis Ashore system, or at least one of the arrays right here, is that it looks a lot like a Ticonderoga class cruiser in its main mast or its main tower right up here. It looks so similar that, like, for some reason, I always feel like it is pretty much the main superstructure of a Ticonderoga brought onto land. But Matthew, what are you laughing at there? Doesn't it look kind of similar a little bit?
Oh yeah, that's what I was thinking. It really does look like they just like superimposed part of these vessels like onto the land there. Maybe that's why they call it the ashore. Like they just took it ashore and like planted it there or something like that. Because I think it's a U.S. Navy installation, isn't it?
Yes, it is a U.S. Navy installation, but the Aegis system is a sea-based system in its first right. It's an air defense system that I believe is mounted onto some U.S. vessels. I believe the Ticonderoga may be one of them. And let me see really quickly if I can pull up the Aegis defense system, and let me see if I can find it right here. And so let me make sure to find this thing. Let me find this ting. And so let's see here. I'm trying to see if, holy moly, that looks horrendous. I'll try and find this for y'all in a second. And here we go. So to quickly explain what the Aegis system is, because I know that it exists and I know it's usually a naval-based system, but the Aegis Ballistic Missile Defense System, also known as Sea-Based Midcourse, is a missile defense agency program under the United States Department of Defense to develop missile defense against short and intermediate range ballistic missiles. The program is part of the United States National Missile Defense Strategy and European NATO Missile Defense System. Aegis BMD is an expansion of the Aegis combat system deployed on warships designed to intercept ballistic missiles in mid-course phase, i.e. after the rocket burn is completed but prior to re-entry into the atmosphere. Aegis BMD-equipped vessels can engage potential threats using the Standard Missile 3 mid-course interceptors and Standard Missile 2 and Standard Missile 6 terminal phase interceptors. So pretty much in short, this is a sea-based missile defense system that can also be mounted onto land, like we can see right here in Redzikowo, Poland, which is, I believe, somewhere in the general area as well. And we can also see another one in Romania. Aw, man. But beyond that, we are generally getting an idea. This is a fairly common sort of a missile defense system, and it has been in service since, let's see here. When was it brought into service? Well, I can't really get a clear answer on that because it looks like it was introduced into service sometime in the early 2000s, and it looks like it was around 2003, most likely, I would assume. But still, very interesting to see, and once again showing us that the U.S. military is there and ready to defend wherever it can, from whatever threats are there. And it does seem as though this little base is going to be providing another great deal of air defense to at least the eastern bulwark of NATO, where it will be the most important going on into the future. But moving on from that. Also, I saw that Greaser Bob, the original, said it's all on Arleigh destroyers, and thank you for sharing that. For some reason, I thought that the Ticonderoga did have some form of Aegis system on board, but I do know that a decent amount of these things are being decommissioned at this point. There's only 9 active out of the original 27 that have been in service, and let me see here really quickly if we can find out what kind of armament it has. And so it generally has 68 RIM 66s. These are actually pretty decent. And let's see here. I'm trying to see. They have the vertical launch cells. Actually, that's only for the 52 through 73 numbered vessels. They have the VLS systems. The other ones actually still work off the RIM 66 system, which some people actually say is a little bit better. That's a whole rabbit hole on its own. But some people actually believe that the RIM 66 and its launcher system is actually better than that of the VLS system for logistical reasons. But beyond that, though, very interesting to see, and we are going to be trying to keep a little bit more of an eye on what the United States is going to be doing on in the future inside the eastern area of Europe, and once again in NATO's defense. But moving on from that little bit of news and on into the Russian Federation again, we do have to talk a little bit more about that Russian revolt that happened, as some Russian troops are now rioting to avoid being sent to the front line like they were in Novosibirsk today. And a lot of people are wondering what happens now, and it looks like a lot of people are very optimistic and believing that it'll spread through the ranks. Some people are a little bit more pessimistic, saying it'll remain isolated to the unit, and some people are saying that it's already happening sometimes off and on because the situation in the Russian army is pretty much untenable for the large part. But nevertheless, what are people thinking about this, Matthew, and what are you thinking about it as well?
So oddly enough, this is a pretty evenly split poll right here. About 39% of the audience said it will spread throughout the ranks, the rioting that's currently happening in that one unit that we saw in the video, while 28% said it will remain isolated to the unit, and 25% said it's already happening sometimes, pretty much all over the place. And I would say this, depending on how the Russians handle this, that's probably going to determine if it spreads or not. I think the Russians are going to expedite those guys to the front line and get rid of them right now, because they were already planning on getting rid of them anyway, so they'll probably just speed that up a little bit quicker. So I think that'll probably prevent it from spreading too rapidly. And I would say it's probably already happening sometimes anyway. Like, the Russians are not known for being orderly or formal or following orders that well. They have quite a bit of command issues because there's really not too much morale in the Russian military. In fact, there's hardly any right now because they're all being basically killed in 3 weeks on the front line. Why would you have any morale in a situation like that? So I would say that it's probably not going to spread because they're probably going to get punished very severely for that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, it probably will spread through the ranks. We are already seeing that it spreads through the ranks. It's a little slow, though it's not really quick or speedy. You know, it's not like it's going to turn into the Russian Revolution, but it certainly is going to spread through the ranks, and it's going to ensure that there is always a great deal of angst inside of the Russian military, as there really always has been, and it seems as though that it is starting to get worse as time goes by, little by little. But with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well. And I also saw an interesting question, and this is one that I want to make sure to answer before we move on. Brian Farnsworth in the chat said, just so we're clear here, Enforcer, you're A-OK with a fascist terrorist state like Russia having nukes, but not Ukraine? LOL. Well, that's kind of wording the question in a way that makes it sound stupid, I'll be honest with you. And let me explain that in a way that makes sense. Russia has nukes. So it doesn't matter whether I'm okay with them having nukes or not, because how are we going to get them from them? You know what I mean? Like, that's like saying this guy has a 44 Magnum and he's standing in the doorway of his townhome. I'm going to go up there and take it from him. Good luck with that. You're probably going to get shot. Kind of like how we would get nuked by the Russians if we went in there and tried to take their nukes. So posing a question like that is a little stupid, because it's not really like we have the option to take their nukes from them. It's not like toys in a pram where we can just pick them up from the Russians and take them away. So the question isn't, do I like the Russians having nukes? Obviously, I don't. I like the Russians having nukes, but there really is no choice in them having nukes or not. Kind of like how I don't like the idea of North Korea having nuclear weapons, but they have nuclear weapons, and there's really nothing that we can do at this point to stop them from having that. With Ukraine, however, and Iran right now, there's an option. Will they have nuclear weapons or not? And of course, with the Iranians, it is a solid no. That is an absolutely silly assumption to make right there for us to say, yeah, you know what, why not? Let's let the Iranians have nuclear weapons. There is a great reason not to. They are an enemy of the United States and the Western world, and that is not a good idea. Another thing that also is the case is that Ukraine also does not have a nuclear weapon. And so for that reason, it's not a question of, do I like the Russians having nuclear weapons? Because, no, I don't. But that doesn't mean that that gives the justification for us to say every Baltic state, Poland, Ukraine, and literally everyone in Europe can start their own nuclear weapons development programs and have hundreds of nuclear weapons by the end of the decade. That doesn't make a lot of sense, because if we were going off of that idea and that kind of an assessment, throughout the entirety of the Cold War, literally everyone in the world would have a nuclear weapon, and that's not the case. Nuclear weapons are very dangerous, and the Russians already have them, so there's nothing that we can do to change that, you see? Like, I can't go back in time and kill Stalin and stop a nuclear weapon from being made. It was going to be made, and they have them now, and it's the world we live in. But we do not see a Ukraine that is nuclear armed, and so the question there is will the Ukrainians be nuclear armed in the future or not? And there's an actual say to be had in that, instead of some sort of a fanciful idea like the Russians will no longer have nukes just because I willed it and I saved humanity by saying they shouldn't have them. That makes no sense. So with that in mind, once again making this quite clear, we have an option with Ukraine. We don't have an option with Russians. They have them. Ukraine doesn't have them. I generally am against other countries having nuclear weapons. As a whole, I'm generally against nuclear weapons by and large. Once again, though, I can't stop the world from having nuclear weapons. They're there now, so we have to live in that kind of a reality. We should be trying to limit the number of nuclear weapons that are present in the world, and we should largely be working to bar really any countries that are not in the non-proliferation treaties from possessing nuclear weapons in the future. That should be a priority for really every country in the world. And so for that reason, I'm not really a big fan of Ukraine having nuclear weapons. But at the same time, if that's the only way that we're going to be able to stop the Russian Federation from driving deeper into Ukraine and then realizing their future ambitions, then I would reluctantly support Ukraine having a nuclear weapon. But I'm not someone who would be gung-ho to see another country become nuclear armed in the world. It's generally just not a good idea. I think it's a bad idea for nuclear weapons to exist as a whole. It completely stops any kind of diplomatic change that sometimes comes around because of the failure of diplomacy and the beginning of wars. There used to be so much societal and not only that necessary change that used to be made in this world. And it no longer is able to be made because nuclear weapons completely stop that change from happening, and the world is stagnating in some forms of societal actions because there is no way to be able to follow through with just using sometimes force of arms to end it. Like, for example, if Nazi Germany existed in the modern day and did not have a nuclear weapon, and they raced through the war in the modern day, let's say World War II happened now, and they were invading Europe, and no one in Europe had a nuclear weapon, and they produced nuclear weapons. By the time we got involved in that war as the United States, it's a standoff. We can't do anything to them. So all of the atrocities that Nazi Germany would have conducted in World War II would go completely by, and there would be absolutely nothing we could do, or else we would probably end up seeing about 2/3 of everyone in America end up dying in a nuclear conflict along with them. And then it becomes the question of, well, how do we keep more people alive? Do we allow the Germans to keep conducting their atrocities because they're nuclear armed, or do we try and stop them and then pretty much end up getting 2/3 of everyone in the Northern Hemisphere killed? And then that's the metric that you have to work off of. With any country that gets a nuclear weapon, there's always a possibility that something like that can happen. Literally any of them that can happen with. Like, for example, every time Israel gets fired at by the Iranians, there's a pretty decent chance, just putting this out there, they could nuke the Iranians. And I'm not generally a big fan of watching, millions of people just get obliterated in nuclear hellfire by anyone. I think it's generally not a great thing. So when we say that there's a limited number of countries that can have nuclear weapons now, but let's expand that number, we're only increasing the probability and a chance that nuclear wars can begin. Because there's just so many different moving parts in the forms of countries that have these nuclear weapons now that can use them. And with more countries having nuclear weapons, and with conflicts always being inevitable in this world, it's a certainty. It is a high possibility that a nuclear war will be far more probable in the future, just because there is a greater percentage of countries that have nuclear weapons that could use them if they ever feel threatened enough. And that's why I'm not a big fan of nuclear weapons. And now, if you ever try and pose a question like that, again, trying to frame me, I hope that explains the answer there a little bit better. Instead of trying to make
Now, the weird thing will be is if the West really, really starts putting pressure on Ukraine to tell them, no, you cannot create a nuclear weapon whatsoever. We won't allow that to happen. And also, you need to stop immediately. And the West starts putting tremendous pressure on Ukraine to back off that statement. That would be kind of ironic, because we've allowed Iran to develop nuclear weapons for over a year now at least. And they've probably already got one right now. We're simply not aware of it in the public, because we've been told that they had one, or they were close to finishing it, almost a month or two ago. So surely they have one by now. Probably don't have a delivery system for it, but certainly they have a warhead ready to go in some form or another. So it's kind of weird. We let Iran make a nuke, but at the same time, it seems like the West is going to object very strongly to Ukraine having a nuke. It's kind of a little bit weird.
Yeah, but once again, though, I do have to throw this out there. If it's the last case scenario, like they have, if this is their only chance at saving themselves, I reluctantly support it. But I generally don't like the idea of them just having a nuke. Like, if they're not in any jeopardy in the future, if U.S. support continues as strong as it ever has been, if the negotiations are from a strong positioning point and they get back Crimea, Zaporizhia, and all of Kherson at a minimum, I generally think that them having a nuclear weapon is rather absurd. If there is, and of course some people are going to be like, wait a minute, you were willing to give up the Donbass? If we're talking about in a bad case scenario, what is the best worst case scenario? That would be the best worst case scenario. In that kind of a situation, them having a nuclear weapon is absolutely absurd. And also on top of that, the question then has to be asked, what are they getting the nuclear weapon for at that point? Are they getting the nuclear weapon to try and assure total victory? Because if that's the case, and the nuclear weapon is an extension of them trying to achieve total victory, they're going to use it, and they're going to get shot back at with more nuclear weapons from the Russians. That's not going to end up benefiting anyone. It's certainly not going to end up benefiting Ukraine. So going off of that kind of an idea, the only situation I could see the Ukrainians developing a nuclear weapon and using it either diplomatically or physically would be in a situation where pretty much all support's dried up, the Europeans are hardly hanging them on, and the Russians are starting to steamroll them. That's the only situation I could see where it would be reasonable or plausible for them to have a nuclear weapon, and there would be a decent explanation for it. Beyond that, I would say that there wouldn't be a good explanation for it. Certainly if they have U.S. assurances and U.S. backing well into the future, which we are supposing at the moment, they probably will, considering how the diplomatic situation is already beginning to unfold. But with that, I hope that answers that fairly well. I just wanted to make sure, folks, and sorry to put so much time into that, but I saw a question I was going to try and start framing the channel as pro-Russian for a really goofy reason, and so I want to make sure to answer that question as best I can and make sure to clarify that so that way someone doesn't go around running their mouths like they probably already are, that the channel is pro-Russian because we're not a fan of nuclear proliferation as a whole. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and it's time for us to actually get on into some questions. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so for our first question segment of the night, we have a very generous super chat here from BC Skyman, the absolute channel legend, and he's back once again, and he puts in a $50 donation, and huge shout to you, BC, for that support once again. I saw you just stopping by for a brief moment, and apparently tomorrow he's taking some more aid somewhere else as well. I can't remember the exact place he was taking. I think it was like North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, but I might have that wrong. But BC, thank you for stopping by. I think he's already left for the night, but we appreciate the support very much. And also, sadly, no comment to address. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I got to thank you so much for the support and the massive support, BC Scammon, and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to make this thing possible for so long. And I got to give you a massive thanks so much once again for always being here and supporting the channel. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support means a lot and helps us to be able to keep this channel running each and every day. If it wasn't for folks like you who have been around for this entire time, we simply would have never been able to make this thing possible and be able to get to the 994th day of the war. And so a massive thanks to you so much once again. I hope that addressed it the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to Hal Rose, who puts in a $33 donation, and thank you very much, Hal, as well, for being a longtime channel legend, just like BC Skyman, one of the old guards on the channel, and he threw in a $33 donation, and huge shout out to you, Hal, for that support. He said, Enforcer Matt, word has it that a Russian soldier's life expectancy has dropped from 3 weeks to just 1 hour when crossing open ground in Ukraine this week, and pick a question, please. And geez, if that is actually true, I was already shocked with the 3-week figure. Like, I was like, 3 weeks? That's all they're lasting on the front line? That's horrific. That's worse than I thought. And if it's actually gone down to an hour, that is just insane. That means the Ukrainians are putting a lot of manpower into Kursk as well, and not just the Russians. So that is wild if that is indeed confirmed true. And also, he did say, pick a question, please.
And I gotta thank you so much for the support, Hal Rose, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I also have to say that we are absolutely thankful to still have you here. You've been a longtime viewer of the channel, and we always are happy to see you in here, Hal Rose. And we're always happy to see that you enjoy the channel enough to support it and help it to keep on running. And also, I would have to say, let's see, word has it, and I've heard that a little bit. I'm not really sure how people are compiling those numbers, because I would assume that if you're in the wide open, there isn't really a good chance of survival there at all, because being in the wide open is generally the big no-no in warfare as a whole, at least since the invention of the rifle, not the musket, but the rifle. It's generally been the rule to not be in the wide open, because you'll usually get killed pretty quickly. So I'd assume that that's probably true, but I also assume that that's probably a fairly consistent standard for anyone who's standing out in the wide open. In fact, I would say that's actually pretty shocking for someone to be in the open in a field for an hour and not get killed. Usually, at least if there was enemy contacts on the other side of that field, I would assume that someone would be dead in minutes. But still, with that, I thank you so much for the support, Hal Rose, and I will try and look into that a little bit more and see how they compiled those stats, if I can find that info or where that came from, because that does sound like it would be a somewhat accurate average to go off of, probably historically even. But still, with that, let's grab that live chat, Matthew. What do we got?
All right, so the live chat question here is going to go to Will M, who says, doesn't Belarus have nukes as well, and how can they have them but Ukraine can't?
That's an interesting question. We don't really know if they have them or not. We do understand that Russian nuclear weapons are in Belarus, and the wordage around them has been confusing. At some points, we've understood that it seems that the Russians are in control of the nuclear weapons. In other instances, Lukashenko has come out and made statements making it sound like Belarus is in control of the nuclear weapons. We really honestly do not know who the nuclear weapons are under control of inside of Belarus right now. I'm generally still leaning towards it's the Russian Federation and not Belarus, because as time has gone by, it has seemed more so the case that the Russians forward deployed their nuclear weapons into Belarus, and Russian forces are fielding and operating them, and not the Belarusians. Because it wouldn't really make a lot of sense for the Russian Federation to hand over nuclear weapons into Belarusian, I guess you could say, jurisdiction or control, because he would never be able to get them back if the Belarusians didn't want to give them back. And then the Russians, of course, a lot like we would in the West, would go, what is the point of letting them have nuclear weapons, because that could be a double-edged sword in the future. That's why you'll see that in the Soviet Union, they did not allow any of the Warsaw Pact countries to field nuclear weapons, because much like the United States, Britain, and France in the Western world were scared of nuclear proliferation and a possible double-edged sword being seen in that, the Soviet Union was also scared equally of the exact same thing happening to them if their Warsaw Pact allies were to start producing their own nuclear weapons. And so for that reason, they pretty much forbade all of the members of the Warsaw Pact from even having nuclear weapons development programs, or in some instances, even really using any nuclear technology at all, even for peaceful purposes in some instances. But I hope that does answer that question fairly well, because I generally do believe that they are under Russian control and not Belarusian control, and so it generally becomes more so the question of why can Ukraine not have nukes if the Russians can forward deploy their nukes into Belarus? They're still controlled by the Russians, it's just that they've been moved forward into Belarus. Kind of like if the United States moved our nuclear weapons in Germany into Poland instead. It's kind of a similar thing. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best we can. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into the last question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on back into the news.
All right, so our last one of the segment is a very generous $100 donation from Corsair F4U, and that is a very generous donation, by the way, and thank you very much for that support indeed. And also, let me check something here. I wanted to go back and look because I thought I saw something here. Let me make sure that I did not miss it. Let's see here. Scrolling back up. YouTube is not showing me that. Thank you very much, YouTube, for not giving me the information that I need. But anyways, I was going to say, I think that might be Corsair's second super chat on the channel. But Corsair, hopefully I'm not mistaken on that. But I think it is. And huge shout out to you for deciding to support the channel in such a bigly way. We appreciate it. He said, question for political scientist Matt. He said, what do you think about proportional representation bringing 3 parties to Europe? And I will say this, Corsair. Sadly, I cannot say whether or not I support that or not because we can't get into politics on the channel. But specifically on that, it depends on which countries you're talking about here. Because I believe the majority of European countries use proportional representation, to my understanding. Don't quote me on that, though, as I don't have that memorized, but I think they do. But sadly, though, I can't weigh in as to whether or not I support it or not. Sadly, we can't do that because of our no politics rule, and the Enforcer would get very mad if I broke it. So thank you very much for that support. But Enforcer, what say you?
I have to thank you so much for the massive support, Corsair F4U. By the way, beautiful plane. Like, we can actually pull up the Corsair F4U just to show it, since your name is literally the name of the plane. It is the Vault F4U Corsair, made by Vault Industries. They are also the people who made Homelander. But look at that plane. It's a beautiful plane.
That's very nice. Look at that. It's
I think,
Marines, too.
Yeah, I think these are some of the most beautiful planes made in World War II, next to the P-51, or these things were kind of beating them a little bit. I think that these things were just amazing. But beyond that, sadly, we can't really answer that question too much because it is generally political in nature, because of course it's now become a political conversation about proportional representation and all such things like that. But still, I wish we could give an answer, but sadly we can. It would be a political answer if we were to give one, because we'd have to either support it or condemn it, and then that would start to make it very clear what kind of political bias the channel has, and then we get thrown into a political camp. And I
guess generally speaking, unfortunately, this isn't political. I guess we can say this to sort of like halfway answer Corsair's question. It's always better to have more competition than less competition. That's, I guess, the best thing I can say without getting political in it and saying which one I support or the other. It's always better to make sure that there is a healthy competition in democracies, and whichever method that is that leads to more competition is probably the better way to go.
Maybe so. Also, I see some people, and I got to make this very clear, are asking about our opinions on the appointments of certain people into the future cabinet of the incoming president-elect. We do not make comments on that. Like as far as supporting or condemning the picks, we cannot do that. That would be political in nature. We cannot condemn or support anyone in the government. We, as far as saying I love them and they're my hero, or I hate them and they're the devil, we can't do that. We just generally have to support them, as in that is going to be the Secretary of State, that's going to be the Secretary of Defense, and that's really all we can say. Those are the people who are in charge, and considering that they are being appointed by the president who was elected by the people, that is what it is. We have to generally back that up, and we're not going to make any comments on that at all, because if we were, that would end up getting fairly political. We never did that on anyone in the current U.S. administration, much less are we going to be doing that in the future U.S. administration, because that would be showing political bias, and that is something that this channel militantly does not show at all. We are militantly neutral, much like the Swiss are on those kinds of topics. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best I can. And also, really quickly, Matthew, I think I'm going to have to go through and start cleaning out bots myself, because we've got people in here right now saying some of the stupidest things, like we hate Israel, which is stupid considering that we literally run fundraisers for Israel sometimes, but that's fine. But anyways, moving on from that, and out of the question segment, it is now time for us to move on into the Middle East. Interestingly enough, right after someone said we hate Israel, we're now going to be covering what Israel has been doing today. And we have been able to hear that the Israelis have been once again attacked by Hezbollah and the Houthis, and we have seen air defense action over apparently Tel Aviv, which we're seeing right here.
Ah, yes, I see you know your Iron Dome well.
Good one. And you, sir, are you ready to receive my limp kassam? Or something like that. And that's the end of the clip. Very interesting to see. And we were also able to see one of the missile systems operating, apparently the Sea Dome, which I've never heard of before. I've heard of the Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Patriot systems, and then the Iron Beam. I have never heard of the Sea Dome, but we could see this one in operation near to Eilat. Oh, dang!
Damn. Oh, that was just petty cash. I had to do it.
And here goes another missile being launched, intercepting another incoming target. And with that, that is the end of that clip. But moving on down out of the area of Israel and on down towards western Yemen, we were also able to see the Saudis using an M1 Abrams to slam some Houthi forces that were getting a little too close to the border. We can see right here the Saudis filming the Houthis as they're getting really close, and a little too close, actually.
Look at that.
In a second, they're about to be all over the place. Why, what's going on there? Why, that's just petty cash. And in a second here, boosh, and they're gone.
Well, my boy, they always said to use a proxy when you want to access the internet, but you actually use a proxy if you want to harass Israel. That's what they always say in Iran, at least.
And indeed they do. And from what we understand, the missiles fired towards the port of Eilat were fired from the Houthis, and we also understand that the rockets fired towards Tel Aviv were most likely fired by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon. It does appear that the Israelis are continuing their ground operations in the area and still making sure to make a decent amount of headway and discombobulate Hezbollah forces as much as possible, and it appears that these things are fairly successful, at least at the moment. Moving on from that and out of that area and on up into Ukraine, it's now time for us to start covering the frontline footage that we've been able to get today. Starting in the Kursk Oblast, we were able to see the Ukrainians repelling a Russian assault in this area near Lyubomovka.
Oh, man. I'm telling you, like, these videos, like, they're so prolific, and you see so many of them all the time, you start taking them for granted, like, how efficient the Ukrainians are at taking out these vehicles like this. Like, we just see them every day, and it's like, oh, look, it's another one. But they're actually, like, taking out this many vehicles, like, literally every single day. It's wild to see.
Man, it is crazy to see. Crazy.
Also, let's see here. Activista said, why do we refer to this geographic problem by group and not country? Why Houthis and not Yemen? Because specifically, we have to talk about the exact proxy group we're talking about here, because Yemen, while they are complicit in letting the Houthis stay there, the Houthis are specifically the group doing it, so we have to refer to them specifically. For the sake of clarity, we have to.
Actually, they don't allow them to be there. They are in the middle of an ongoing civil war that's been going on for about 10 to 11 years, and thanks to Iranian support, the Houthis have been able to continue to control the large population centers inside of western Yemen, and while the Yemeni government has tried to push them out, they've never been able to get the backing or support to be able to successfully do that. So for that reason, that's that's why the Houthis continue to exist. That's why we don't call them Yemenis, we call them Houthis, because the Yemeni government is actually in an ongoing war against the Houthis and trying to defeat them, although that appears to not really be happening at all at this point, because the Yemeni government simply does not have the fighting power to be able to push them out of the area. That would be the more accurate answer, and that's why we call them Houthis and we don't call them Yemenis. That would be like saying with the Hezbollah forces that they're Lebanese. And while they generally are Lebanese from what we understand, at least from what we know, they still are a completely different force than the Lebanese government. Although in that situation, though, you could really say that that is by the blessing of Lebanon, because Hezbollah is really tied in heavily to the Lebanese government. But with Yemen, they're literally involved in the civil war against the Houthis, and they have been for about 10 years now, so that's why we call them the Houthis and not the Yemenis. But with that, I hope that does.
Yeah, I thought maybe the Houthis had won the civil war, because I had looked at some articles here just to confirm this. It looks like maybe they've won the war, or at least had a narrow victory in it.
Narrow victory is in they've kind of been able to continue to exist, but it's like saying that the Bashar al-Assad regime had a victory because they've now pushed everyone across the Euphrates, and they pretty much control everything south of the river. Like, that's kind of almost the same thing, because technically Syria is in the process of rebuilding, and has been for a little bit now, because the Bashar al-Assad regime pretty much controls most of the major population centers now throughout Syria. And so for them, this war could go on indefinitely, technically, and they've kind of won it because they were able to reunite most of the country under their control, except for the fringe areas in the northeast where there really isn't a lot of people living. So you could kind of make the same argument there, but the Syrian civil war is still ongoing, although it's a very low intensity conflict at this point.
Interesting. Well, good to know.
It is good to know, because not a lot of people know this stuff, because not a lot of people are always paying attention to the ongoing conflicts of the world. Like, I'll be honest with y'all, sometimes I don't either. So, like, if this is news to y'all, don't worry. Sometimes things are news to me too, so it's no big deal. But moving on from that and out of the area and on up into Ukraine, we were able to see up near Bolshoi Soldatskoy a Russian TOS firing at the Ukrainians. Pretty wild picture. We've seen a lot of TOS thermobaric launchers getting destroyed throughout the course of the war, and it is interesting to note that they are starting to use them once again within the Kursk Oblast as they try and use the thermobaric weapons to try and clear the Ukrainian positions and move them out. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into our next clip, where we are able to see soldiers of the 225th Separate Assault Battalion being captured by, well, actually a Russian soldier being captured by the 225th Mechanized Brigade. So, well, the 225th Mechanized Battalion. And so here's the clip.
Oh my, a petty soldier.
Oh, heavens. And we can see them here showing the trenches down below as the 225th is inside of them, actually conducting a counterattack. Well, they had conducted a counterattack, and now they're taking a Russian soldier prisoner after they've been able to reassert their defensive positions in this area. Jake, he said Yemen equals failed state. There are a lot of failed states inside of the Middle East. I would consider Syria and Yemen to be both failed states. I would also consider Lebanon to be a failed state, considering that their government largely exists as second fiddle to the Hezbollah forces and the IRGC inside of the country, which really run the show. But we can see here...
Also, why are these guys wearing blue helmets, by the way?
It's the blue tape to identify them as Ukrainians.
Ah, okay. I was wondering. I was like, that's weird. They're wearing blue on their helmet instead of their shoulders.
Man, it's not the
arm.
UN, man. It's not the UN. They're not in there going, man, we're keeping the peace and laying down the beast. You know what I mean? Like, it's like they're not doing that. But you see them here continuing to process the Russian prisoners of war down there below. And that's the end of the clip for the large part. But still, a very interesting thing to see, as it is showing that the Ukrainians actually are defending their positions well enough to be able to conduct small counterattacks and retake lost positions once the Russians have pretty much lost their steam and begun to retreat from the field. Moving on out of the Kursk area, though, and into the location unknowns, we did also get to see how the Russians are making delicious water. Matthew, you can already tell that this video is going to be a trip. Are you ready?
Man, it's about to be disgusting. Let's see it.
You know, I don't really know if we should be able to show this. I don't know if YouTube would like us to show this or not, but you were going to give it a shot anyways. What could go wrong?
Вот такую
It's a septic tank.
Смотрите.
Oh my god.
Вот.
And they
Oh,
filter the
Lion.
water with these.
Oh, get the ladle out, man. Ladle it right up.
Вот такую воду мы пьем. Ебать, заебали перестреливаться.
I'll tell you
yeah,
what,
that's
folks.
some good stuff there. The live straw ain't filtering that one out.
It's a delicious day for the Russian army.
Грязный, оброщий. Воняет,
He's watching a
сука.
TikTok on how to properly filter water.
Сам, блядь, нихуя я оброщий, пиздец, грязный.
This guy's already missing teeth from it.
Dude, it's like rock gut, man. Like, it's literally rock gut.
Вся движуха, она.
I think the teeth loss might have come before the sewer water, but anyways, like he's showing us, he's like, this is what happened.
Dude, it's like, what happened to your teeth? Was it like the sewer water? No. Crocodile. Oh, it's like, okay.
Oh, it was the crocodile. I'm sorry.
Наш боец тоже. Пузо позывной у него.
Oh yeah, he's mixing it up like Walter White.
That's a pretty good one, dude. Let him cook.
Hey, let him cook, man. Don't let him cook, man. Do not.
Dude, I would not drink that water. I'd rather die of thirst before I started drinking, like, filtered sewage. But moving on from that, we also did get to see some pictures of the Bodana in action. The Ukrainians have actually gotten up to producing about 18 of these things a month, which is a pretty significant number, pretty much making up for any losses that they're taking monthly and also allowing them to grow their Bodana artillery force a little by little each and every month. Great to see, and of course, good to know that they are continuing on with the use of their own home-built SPGs. Meanwhile, we also got to see the Russian casualty report, and it was fairly high. Holy moly!
Oh my god, man, this thing is juicy, man. 3 bombcats, but damn though, the troop losses are staying hovering close to 2,000. I wonder why that is. I wonder why.
Good googly moogly, that thing is juicy. Man, you know what it looks like, man? It looks like Mike Wazowski presenting himself. You know that? Oh, dude, that was a rough one. But beyond that, Miss Disa, the keeper of the record, said 1,770 Russian soldiers lost is the second highest daily troop loss, tied with November 11th, meaning that the past 3 days have been the highest troop loss days in the entirety of the war. And 24 tanks, let's see, the tanks are actually 24 according to the Armed Forces of Ukraine. 23 was yesterday's losses, but the total is correct. So now moving through the casualty report, we were able to see that 1,770 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 49 APCs, 96 supply trucks, 24 main battle tanks, 56 artillery pieces, 61 drones, and 3 Bobcat skid steers. All in all, an incredibly good day, and good to note, and good to see that the Russian Federation is continuing to take the losses that they really need to be taking at this point. It is showing that they're not doing that well. But moving on out of that area and on into Vovchansk, we were also able to see a T-84 plot of the 3rd Brigade. And it's really cool to see this thing. I love the T-84s. I think they're really neat. They're a heavily modified version of the T-80 that's in Russian service, and we don't really get to see these things a lot on the battlefield. But moving on from that and into our next clip, we were also able to see the Ukrainians hitting some Russian systems within the Vovchansk area, such as this one artillery system right here. Look at it. It's one hell of a system.
I don't think that was just petty cash. I think that was loads of cash.
What about all of these, man, the way the Russian propagandists put out the information, what about all these thousands of tanks lost? Why, that's just petty cash, or something like that.
Said no Russian ever, like seriously speaking. Like they don't have anything called petty cash. They have loads of rubles that are completely worthless.
Man,
you remember like those stories like back in the day when they were having such a hard time in the USSR that they would literally eat the rubles? Like, do you remember that?
I don't remember that in particular. I think they did that in Weimar, Germany.
And now I heard, like, now listen, we went to Alabama public school, so this could be bullshit, like I'm being perfectly honest with you right here. It was that one teacher, you know, the one I'm talking about, the one that said the propeller and all that stuff like that.
She was wrong.
Okay, yeah, I was about to say that. I take that back. I'm probably wrong about that. She's the one who said it, and she said that they used to like get a spoon, put the rubles in a bowl, chop them up, and then eat the rubles like cereal with milk.
Yeah, but you know what else she also said, man? Like, she said that in communist China, not the Republic of China, that in communist China, when you go to the hotels, there's a giant TV screen outside of every hotel room in the hall that has a live camera that cannot be turned off, so that way security officers in the hotels can look at the monitor and see what you're doing inside your room. It's like, that does not happen. Like, that's not a thing. Like, if the cameras are there, why the hell would they have a TV outside of every room? Why wouldn't they just have like the cameras hidden and then have like one central control room where they get to see all the cameras? So like that story doesn't even make any sense, and that is just absolute like absurdity. Like that's one. I'll be honest with you, man. Sometimes people really do damage to making you believe how crap other countries are because they just like greatly exaggerate and lie about it. But still,
I remember when she said the Vikings used to like fight to the death for a PlayStation. I knew she was full of crap after she said that. I'm like, there's no way.
man, I'm telling you. Like, let's see. Let's see here. It doesn't look like I can find any stories about Russians eating rubles. I would doubt that they're nutritious at all. Wall paste is actually slightly nutritious, though, in case y'all are wondering. Don't eat wall paste. But moving on from that and into the Vovchansk area, we were able to see a Ukrainian soldier walking through some Russian mortar fire. Oh!
Oh, is this that Russian that lasts an hour on the battlefield? The one that runs through the open field?
Oh, no, this is Ukrainian right here.
Oh, well, he's going to last at least for a few years, that is.
Holy moly! Oh! Bro, that's how I was coughing today after I ate that spicy sauce.
Oh, man, that stuff was too hot.
And with that, that's the end of the clip right there, but still showing a Ukrainian soldier on their average commute to work. Also, before we move on to the next one, I do have to make sure to kind of lay out a new rule because I would generally text this behind the scenes, but this will take too long to say. Matthew, I'm noticing a lot of people are coming in here and they're making political comments. They're not the normal kind of political comments. They're fairly new. People saying things like, I have no faith in America anymore because of, you know, so-and-so or someone, and so for this reason, this and that and that. Those are political comments. I want to make that very clear. They are political comments. We're going to have to treat them as such. We're not allowing comments like that anymore in the live chat. If you make a comment like that, expect to be timed out or expect to be banned because they are political and they're in violation of the rules. Like, I know many people love the idea that the channel was non-political until someone they don't like was elected, and now it needs to be political. Like, I like that that people like that idea and respect that and everything. That's wonderful, but that's not the place here. If you don't like the incoming president, this is not the place to say it. If you don't like the current president, this is not the place to say it. We don't get into politics on this channel. That doesn't just apply to us as the hosts. That applies to the live chat as well. We don't allow comments like that, and we're going to be having to deal with those a lot more strictly moving forward because the chat's starting to evolve into a political cesspit. And I'm not going to have people coming in here and battling and saying that they destroyed the left wing or they destroyed the right wing because the plane's going to crash and we're going to be on an episode of Air Disasters. Just making that really clear. So moving on from that, and out of the area and towards Kupiansk, we were able to see some more Russians getting hit by the 92nd Brigade, nonetheless. And we could see one of the Russian MLRSs actually getting blown up.
Captain Harambe said, is it political if you say that Russia is a crap hole country? No, not at all.
Also, war is not politics. That is a very common misconception, but I'll be completely frank with you. War has absolutely nothing to do with any domestic political topics, period. Tell me how any of the top hot topics of American politics ties into this war. Tell me how, and I will relent, but there's no way that they do. And no one can ever explain that would make sense. But moving on from that and into Krasnoyartynsk, we also got to see some older archival footage that finally just came out of the Ukrainians shooting down a Ka-52 with a manpad. And also, war is not politics. War is a failure of diplomacy. And diplomacy and politics are generally different things. Politics is a domestic thing, diplomacy is a foreign thing dealing with other countries. And we can see the Ka-52 shot down right there. We can actually see the smoke plume rising. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but very nice to see. Very interesting to see, as a matter of fact. But moving on from that, and further down the line and into the area of Sevastopol, we were also able to see the Ukrainians holding the Russians back in this area. And this was actually from the 4th Brigade. And we can see the BMP getting slammed right there by the FPV drone, causing a significant damage.
What is that thing? Dragging fire behind it or something? It looks like it's dragging a trail of lava.
I really don't know. I was looking at that too. I was like, what the hell? Well, you see this Russian tank here also getting slammed as well by, I think, an anti-tank mine, actually, or an FPV drone. Couldn't really tell. We can also see another one getting hit. We see a BMP also get, well, actually an MTLB getting hit right there. And that's the end of the clip, but nice to see the 4th Rubish, of course, doing their work in that area. But moving on a little bit further on down the lines and towards Chasiv Yar, we were also able to see a Russian FPV drone making a very near miss on a Ukrainian APC. And here is the clip. Man, that thing's got an engine on it, not gonna lie.
Oh, блядь, rev up the engine, блядь.
You see them just riding along, just chilling for the large part.
Man, nothing like the sound of a nice V8.
Oh! And there was the near miss. And that's the end of that clip, but that was one hell of a near miss near Chasiv Yar. But moving out of that area and further down the line, we also get to see that the Russians finally came up on and captured a Leopard 2A4 decoy. Now, this was interesting. It looks really similar. I mean, it actually looks like a Leopard 2A4 with the net over it and everything, but it was a decoy. So they thought they had a big catch here, but it was quite literally nothing. It was just a whole bunch of balsa wood on a light metal frame. But moving on from that...
As they say, the tops are made of the rubber and the bottoms are made of the springs. They bounce, they bounce.
Man, I'm telling you what, man. I don't even know how that works on that one, but I liked it because it was a reference.
You didn't know that Winnie the Pooh reference?
I know the Winnie the Pooh reference, but I don't know how it works in that instance. I was like, I don't know. I don't know, man.
It's a decoy, man. You know, it's like, it's a phony. It's not a real deal.
Bro, it's a faker. Just like Hot Dog Man. Oh!
Man, you just didn't get my reference, man. I'm disappointed.
Man, I would be kind of
trap beat.
Dude, they were about to hit the trap beats, man. Sick beats, I tell you. Oh, you see the Russians here moving in the distance. Actually, those are Ukrainian Leopard 2A4s. Sorry, correction there. I couldn't really tell what they were in the fog. I assumed they were Russians. But we can see here the Leopard 2A4s making their way downtown, walking fast, firing off some 120mm smoothbores at the Russians and slamming them dead on immediately. And we actually see it firing on the move as well, which is pretty interesting. And getting some more dead on hits.
That every click of the keyboard is so loud. It's like louder than the explosions in the video. Boom! F key. Number 1. Someone said, did I miss the part about Ukraine threatens Russia with nuke in the title? Yes, you did. Please go back to the beginning.
Yes.
Start from the beginning. Please go back there and take a closer look. Don't let the brain worm fool you. Go right back to the start.
You gotta go to the start and see where it all began, because we actually covered it. It's real news, but we have so much news to cover, we don't cover the same thing for 2 hours. How about you see them just hitting the Russians? Also, by the way, I just wanted to make sure to pull this up because some people insist that diplomacy and politics are the same thing. That's what all the typing was about, was to see if they are the same thing. And it appears that everyone is in consensus. Diplomacy and politics are pretty much two entirely separate things. Like, yes, diplomacy and politics exist within the same environment, but they are completely separate things, because diplomacy is the outwards actions of nations in relations to each other. Politics is an inherently inward thing, focusing on the domestic matters of the nation. That's why we've always said that there is no such thing as politics on the channel, because everything we talk about are diplomatic actions in between the United States, the greater Western world, and other countries that are also on the same planet. So largely diplomacy, and a completely separate thing from politics. That's why if you come in here and you try and say, just to bring up the actual topics, don't start talking about your political opinions in the chat, please, because this is not to spurn this discussion. It's just to make it quite clear. If you ever said anything like gun control is related to the Ukraine war, you've lost me, because they're not. Like, I don't even know how those two things would be combined into almost being the same thing. That's why the Ukraine war isn't a part of politics, because those two things aren't even close to being related to each other, and there's no way you can connect them to each other to make them related to each other. So,
well, technically, it's all politics, but you're referring to partisan domestic politics specifically.
Yes, like that's exactly what I'm talking about, because as far as our relations to foreign countries go, that is almost in an entirely different wheelhouse than, well, it is in a completely different wheelhouse than domestic politics. Like, nothing in domestic politics, unlike, folks saying the grocery prices are high or they're low, or, things like that, that has absolutely no impact on the war or our relations with other countries in regards to that at all, really.
Mortophobe Gaming said, governments have a Department of Foreign Affairs. Is that not politics? It is politics. Like, diplomacy is politics, like, by definition. But, like, I think the enforcer is just not, like, adding the proper word in front of it. He's talking about domestic partisan stuff. Like, the things that cause internal fighting within, like, for example, the United States specifically. That's the most controversial of all the politics right now, at least for U.S. citizens, that is. And that's specifically the ones he's talking about.
And I hope that does address that fairly well. And we can see here the Leopard 4 is continuing to grind down the Russians. This is actually an amalgamation of videos of the Leopard 2A4 over the past several weeks, about the past 2 weeks for the most part. And it looks as though the Ukrainians are using the Leopards quite heavily around Kurakovy.
Oh.
Man, they're giving them the works. We see a little M113 there in the middle of the field.
Oh.
Russians sleepy Russians? Well, moving on from that.
No, he was just on post. He was posted up.
Man. He just presenting himself. But anyways, we can see the Russians now getting slammed again by the Leopard 2A4. As I hear Matthew sneeze out there.
No, I muted my mic now to put that off the mic, and you said it anyway.
Man, because I heard a chew, and I was like, man, he's sneezing out there.
Man, the corgi jumped when I did that too. I felt bad. I was like, I can't mute it for the corgi, sadly, but I can mute it for the audience. I didn't blow your speakers out. You're welcome.
He blew the corgi's ears.
Oh man, I saw the ears go sideways and then down. I was like, oh man.
Man, you know what happened right there, man? The corgi got up and said, "What in the blazes? That's just petty cash," and then went back to sleep.
Now more like I'm gonna get mugged for petty cash if I keep on sneezing in front of those dogs. Those corgis are
Oh,
vicious, man. You know they whip out with those little small legs that just whip out a switchblade. Come on, give me all your cash.
they said, I'm going to rob you of your petty cash. It's like, oh no, like, don't do that, please. I'll beg of you.
We call this petty larceny.
Let's see here. We're now seeing another clip of the Leopard 2s holding off another Russian armored assault. They are using these Leopard 2s like they're running out of style. I'm not going to lie. The Leopard 2s are doing work down here around Kurakove at the moment. And we can see them getting slammed right here. Oh!
Oh my God, man. Damn, what the?
Holy moly! Oh! Ole! But anyways, that's the end of that clip right there. Very interesting one. And moving on from that... It's the Yeti! But moving on from that, we also get to see some Ukrainian artillery on the move in the form of crabs. The Ukrainians have crabs! Oh,
Man, these crabs right here, I tell you what, they don't have the rubber bands on them, or you know what I mean? Like they can't just clamp you. These right here are unrestricted crabs.
Man, they're free-range crabs. We've been making that joke of like for 3 years now. But moving on from that and out of that clip, it's now time for us to move on down into Crimea because we were able to see that a road bridge outside of Dzhankoy today collapsed unexpectedly, and the Russians caught it on film. Look at this.
Ah, yes, an omen of things to come. Bridges falling down. Dear Lord. That looks like a truck that was on the Crimean bridge, if I'm not mistaken, a short while back.
Man, Crimea River.
Man, crime an ocean.
Well, that's the end of that clip. Not fun for them. And we're also hearing that apparently the Russians are dispersing to abandoned military bases. Not much more to be said there than what the title suggests. But moving on down to the Sevastopol, we also got to hear that apparently a Russian captain of the Black Sea Fleet was killed today in a car bombing. And that was fairly interesting because I heard that when he got in the car, he said, "SpongeBob, me boy, I'm going to turn on the ignition. I hope there isn't a car bomb on it." And then he turned it on and, well, he's in Davy Jones' locker now. And that car got wrecked. Like, it was a pretty decent one right there. The Ukrainian partisans did work. But moving on out of that clip inside of Sevastopol, it's now time for us to move on up to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 994 of the War. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
And give me a speech, please. Give me a long-lasting speech, yes.
And it will be a long-lasting speech.
Шановні українці, українки, коротко про сьогодні. Перше, вдячність нашим воїнам ППО, кожному і кожній в різних видах і родах сил, які здійснюють захист неба. Щоночі і щодня збиття російських шахедів та ракет. Сьогодні вранці збили російську балістику. Це вагомо. Кожен такий успіх – це порятунок життів наших людей. Україна вдячна усім нашим партнерам, які допомагають протиракетами і системами захисту неба. Зараз працюємо, щоб додатково збільшити постачання від партнерів і по ракетах, і по комплексам захисту, і по всьому, що необхідно для посилення наших мобільних вогневих груп. Стратегічна мета – досягти такого практичного рівня співпраці з партнерами, щоб ми тут, в Україні, могли виробляти необхідні для нас системи протиповітряної оборони і протиракети. Говорив сьогодні з канцлером Німеччини Олафом Шольцем. Німеччина – лідер в підтримці саме ППО. І ми обговорили зараз постачання ще однієї системи IRIS-T і роботу в подальшому над розвитком повітряного щита. Також обговорили формат Рамштайну, співпраця, яка принесла багато користі Україні та всім партнерам. Це наша спільна сила. І також обговорили підготовку зустрічі групи 20 в Бразилії вже наступного тижня. Домовляємось з партнерами, щоб позиція України була представлена у всіх відповідних дискусіях. Тільки разом світ здатен гарантувати справді надійний мир і тривалий спокій для міжнародних відносин. Була доповідь головкома Сирського, фронт, найбільше уваги в Донеччині. Також спробам окупанта розширити наступальні дії, зокрема, це Куп'янський напрямок. Я вдячний всім нашим підрозділам за стійкість. І загалом я хочу відзначити бойові бригади, які цими днями проявили себе надзвичайно сміливо та результативно. 24-та окрема механізована бригада, 44-та окрема артилерійська, 60-та і 65-та окремі механізовані, 68-та окрема єгерська, 102-га, 124-та і 126-та бригади ТРО, 128-та окрема гірсько-штурмова і 406-та окрема артилерійська бригади. Молодці, воїни. І ще одне. Активно працюємо за пунктами внутрішнього плану стійкості України, плану, який наповнить внутрішньою силою все те, що ми представили партнерам в плані перемоги. Сьогодні були наради з урядовцями, керівниками державних компаній, також відповідальними в Офісі президента за напрямками, секретарем Ради національної безпеки і оборони. Включаємо в документи те, що пропонували громадські організації. Триватимуть надалі такі обговорення з усіма, чия експертиза може підтримати державу. Потрібен детальний доктринальний підхід, щоб наша держава зараз вистояла. І треба дотиснути Росію до чесного миру. Обов'язково всі внутрішні сили консолідуємо. Вдячні усім, хто нам допомагає. Слава Україні!
And
Herom Slava.
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky. And that actually wraps up the news segment for the night as well here on day 994 of the war. And it is a very interesting day of news to be sure. And we've had a lot of people here tonight, interestingly enough as well. About 50,000 people have been here at this point. And I got to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for watching so far. If y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. Make sure to like the stream as well. If you haven't already, we've gotten up to 2,300 likes. Maybe we can bump it up a little bit higher than that. Maybe. Who knows, though. But still, I hope that we are able to get higher and higher up there in the subscriber counts because the Lee Spring Army grows day by day. We've hit 305,000 subscribers. We're actually up to around 305,300 at this point. And so, if you would like to be one of those people, please be so. But nevertheless, we are going to be moving on into that delicious bussin' question segment where we get to talk to all of y'all. And so, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. And also, by the way, we're obviously jumping into our last question segment of the night, but I had to call out this bot in the live chat here. The bot said, "Hello, I am from Korean People's Army in Moscow for training then battlefield calendar next year." All right. Well, thanks for stopping by, and I hope it's been good to your liking here. You know, it's not going to go very well over there. I don't know if you know that. And also, apparently, y'all been watching some nasty stuff on the internet. Y'all should not do that. But anyways... Terrible stuff, man. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. I guess they've decided to switch over to a YouTube instead of the other one, the other tube, which is not so nice, actually. But anyways,
it's actually not a tube, Matthew. It's a hub.
How would you know that?
Well, everyone knows that. Like
I don't know that.
Yes, you do. But with that, let's just get on into the next one.
Jeez, man. But anyways, jumping here into...
You can hear quietly behind that one. I say, yes, you do. Like, that was what was behind it. It's like, of course I do. But anyways, what do we got, Matthew?
Well, anyways, now that we've settled that score there, and the fellow here whose username is Wong has gotten off of, I guess, Hub and moved over to Tube. We're going to move on here to our last question segment. That's getting me all messed up. But anyways, our last one here is going to go to Jigglesworth. And it's not our last one, sir. It's our last question segment, by the way. Jigglesworth puts in a $25 donation. And thank you very much, Jigglesworth, for that support. They said, with the U.S. rebuilding the World War II airstrips on Tinian and Saipan, scheduled to be finished next year. Do you think that factored into Taiwan agreeing to let the Hawk system go to Ukraine? And keep up the good work in LLT, LSA.
That may be the case. That may have been why the Taiwanese gave them up. Or it may be that the Taiwanese actually are going to have their air defense systems replaced with the Patriots that are coming in the future. And considering how effective and efficient the Patriots are, they decided that they could give up that many Hawk systems. That may be the possibility as well. But I also believe that the heavier U.S. presence is going to be seen, considering that they are rebuilding the air bases at Tinian and Saipan, are probably a decent consideration as well that the Taiwanese are weighing in, is that they can count on larger amounts of U.S. arms support to be able to back them up in the event that the Chinese actually went to war with Taiwan. So I would say it's probably a blend of those two things. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you who support the channel make this thing possible day in and day out. If it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here right now, and we wouldn't be able to cover the news here on this channel. And that is something that we've been able to do for 994 days, and we're going to hopefully be able to continue to do well on into the future. Of course, that will be relatively in line with YouTube allowing us to be here, because we did have something very interesting happen today behind the scenes that I wasn't necessarily that happy about. We actually had one of our streams removed from YouTube. YouTube went and removed it because they said it was misinformation. And that was actually our recent live stream on day 975, which was about 19 days ago, about a little over 2 weeks ago, when the Israelis strike the Iranians. They never explain, like, this is the thing that kind of gets me a little bit irked with YouTube's system there, is that they never explain what they're claiming is misinformation, because everything that we showed from that night was all video and picture evidence from the moment of. And also on top of that, there was also official government statements being used the entire length of that show. So it's a little bit bizarre to see that that was the case, but, you know, nevertheless, that is what it is. Anyways, with that, I hope that does kind of cover that fairly well, but still, thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you allow us to have a voice here on YouTube and to be able to report the news each and every single day. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to Uncle Sam's misguided child, who puts in a $20 donation. And Uncle Sam, my voice just went very unpatriotic there. I just had a voice crack, but please excuse that. But thank you very much for the $20 support, and we appreciate it very much. But anyways, this one says, good evening, LSA, and long live these guys, and thanks for the truth. He puts in a Ukraine flag, a beer pint or a mug, the USA flag, the muscle, and the Israel flag.
And I gotta thank you so much for the support, and I gotta thank you for the kind words as well, and helping this channel to keep on running, and thank you so much for enjoying it massively. We are always trying to keep this thing rolling, Uncle Sam's misguided child, and thank you so much for saying long live these guys, because we are trying incredibly hard behind the scenes to keep everything rolling and running. And sometimes it's a little bit more difficult than others. Tonight it's actually going to be fairly difficult, and I'll be honest, we're kind of lucky that we don't have a large amount of live chats and super chats to cover tonight, because I have to get up insanely early in the morning tomorrow because we have something really big going on in the background. Hopefully it'll go well. Just to tell y'all what it is, I'm actually going to be finally working with the orchestra, which was reserved for the slot tomorrow, and I'm going to be up at, I believe, 7:30 in the morning local time. It's already 11 at this point, and I'll be working with that entire orchestra, the composer, and everyone else involved to be able to get that finally done and put into the intro. Hopefully it'll be put in by day 1000, by the day 1000 celebration. So that will be really cool to see. And we cannot wait to put that into the intro, but still I have to get up really early in the morning. But still, that's a part of the work that we do, and we love to do it because it makes this channel just a little bit better for y'all to watch. And thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running. And so, huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to... And also, hold on just a second here. Do I have a poll running? No, I don't have a poll running. Okay. LSA Rocks is saying that Wong, who is our North Korean sacrifice here, who is in the chat for Russia, that is, apparently he's a translator. I don't know what happened to Wong. He left after he moved over from Hub to Tube. He suddenly just left here. I guess he went back to Hub, that is. So, anyways, he's gone now. So I unbanned him to let him say something else. I was like, well, let's hear what he's got to say, actually, if this guy's actually serious. And all of a sudden, he left. I guess he got bored with Tube. But anyways, moving on here to our next one. This one goes to Robert Massey III, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Robert Massey, for being a longtime channel legend, and we appreciate it very much. He says, is there a way to know if an individual country is in the pursuit of acquiring or producing a nuclear weapon without them openly saying so?
Yes, there is ways to know that. If we ever see that they're smuggling or importing in any kind of refined uranium products or any sort of radioactive materials, if we know that they have a peaceful nuclear weapons program and they're not allowing in inspectors, that also is a very strong sign as well. And there are a couple of others. Generally, for example, the production of a new facility in a undisclosed, well, not an undisclosed, but a remote location, generally away from any major cities, usually would be an indication, if you see certain buildings there, like a research reactor, that they're trying to enrich some sort of radioactive material into weapons-grade material. So there are clear indicators that one can see that would show that a country is working towards developing or creating a nuclear weapon without them publicly stating it. Although we do not know how the Ukrainians would do it without testing it first. Everyone always has to test their nuclear weapons first to make sure that they work. We don't know how in the world they would end up testing theirs, but still, it is something that they're talking about. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, or at least give an idea of how one could be caught while they're developing a nuclear weapon, because we actually were able to see before North Korea made their nuclear weapon that they were working on one, and I think it's near Pyeongsan, right around here. And yeah, here we go. Here's the Pyeongsan uranium plant right here. They actually burn coal in this plant to get the radioactive materials out of them, because all coal in the world actually has a little bit of uranium in it, interestingly enough. And so if you burn enough coal, you can see the giant heaps of coal over here that's still just sitting around, and also the toxic lakes as well that have been created from the process. You're able to get enough uranium to actually produce a usable, at least enriched uranium product. And so for that reason, the North Koreans, considering that they have no raw uranium veins in their country, but they have a large amount of coal inside their country, they just kept burning coal until they got enough uranium to be able to create some form of a nuclear weapon. So it's actually
You know where they move it when they want it protected? Like they want to protect their uranium. You know where they move it?
Where do they move it?
Pyongyang.
Man, because it's protected by the gang.
Yeah, exactly.
Man,
they got that gang protection, man. They didn't even have to pay for it.
Man, where the hell is Pyongyang? Because there is a Pyongyang. There it is! Pyongyang, right here.
Yes, the Pyongyang. The whole place is a gang. I'm telling you what. What does it look like in Pyongyang? Oh, we can't see it?
Sadly, no.
Oh, wait. There's a local government office up there at the top. Can we see
boy.
what the ratings are in local government office? Oh, it doesn't have a
None.
rating. Oh, no phone number or nothing. You can't even call them.
Wait a minute, the local government office is like an execution post? Like, that looks like a firing squad, like, ring right there, doesn't it?
Man, if you got any complaints, see the big man.
They sit there and say, okay, we always do anonymous reporting. Put on the blindfold. Okay, let us tie you up to the pole. Ready? Aim, fire. Okay, anyone else got a complaint? It's like, man, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Also, by the way, the design of the city is horrendous. It's literally all built on just one long street. Like, it's like you live here in this house that looks to be overgrown with weeds, and then you have to get to work in this building down here. It's like, good luck, buddy. You gotta walk the whole freaking way. How far is that even? Like, how long is this town? About 3 miles. And it's like hardly wide at all. It's like all on the main street. But they also have Byoke, I can't even pronounce that. But they have another train station further up. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce that at all anymore. Also, they have the smiley face made and the toxic goop in this pond. But beyond that, wait a minute, what's this? What's this? What is this? Very interested, Matthew. There's like these small outcroppings of places out there that have no names, but they're there.
I wonder if that is some type of re-education center. You know, not like you know, hooked on phonics or something like that, but a little bit more intense.
Can we find a North Korean re-education center? North Korean. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find them. Okay, so there's actually one near Hwasong. No joke. The town that they name all of their missiles. There's one up there. So let's go up to Hwasong, to Hwasong, and let's see if we can find it. Is it somewhere in this area? Okay, so let's go to this one. And let's see here. So where is the exact GPS coordinates of this thing? So this is camp number 16, apparently, wherever this is in the area. And I'm trying to find it. Apparently it has an estimated population size of 20,000. So it's not going to be small. It's going to be fairly sizable. Wait a minute. That's not it. I would assume that's not it.
Should it really be called a re-education camp anyways? I don't think there was really much education in the first place, because I don't think North Korea is really focused on educating people because they want them to be ignorant so that way they can control them better. So I think it's just like a initial education camp.
Yeah. It's probably just to simply put it, you see, it's probably more of just a concentration camp. That's what they're called online, actually, by the army. So I would assume that that's what they really are. But let's see. The official name is Kwan Lee So. So let's Kwan Lee So. Can we find that? Can we pull that up? No. Well, can we get GPS coordinates for it?
I see people saying Camp 22 over and over and over. So maybe that might be it.
Let's see here. I'm trying to find Kwan Lee So. Let's see here. Number 25. Chongjin. Okay, so there's most of them are up in the north. There's another one up here near Chongjin. Maybe that one will be easier to find. Not finding it. Not really. Wait a minute.
Was that a hospital that I saw? We'll have to check that out in a second. Like, I'm curious to see what their hospital's like.
Bro, it's just like any random building. It's just any random building. It's right next to the train station that looks to be covered in coal dust. So I don't think it's a really healthy hospital per se. I think it's more so of an unhealthy hospital. But let's see. Does anyone actually know where these places are? Because I'm trying to find them and there's no GPS coordinates for them anywhere. You can just pull them up over and over and over again, and it looks like no one wants to really say exactly where they are. At least on Wikipedia. And let me see if I can find them somewhere else.
Well, let's see. The prisons of North Korea, according to the U.S. State Department. Diplomacy in action. Oh, thank you so much. Let's see here. They have coordinates to it. Camp 14, Kejon. Let me send you those coordinates in the live chat. Thank you, State Department, for this. This is the most valuable thing the State Department's provided to us in a long time.
And we do thank you for that. Quite tremendously, even.
I got Camp 15 Yodok next, too, if you want that one. That might be a bigger one than Kejon.
Let's see here. Let me see if I can grab that one, and there we go.
I got the Hwasong. I got that one, too, like when you want the coordinates to that one.
So let's take a look at this one. Oh, wait a minute. That's interesting. This is not what I would expect it to look like. It almost looks like a normal village. But where is... Oh, wait a minute. It's
on Google Maps, man. They literally listed on the advertisement, the concentration camp.
Look at that. Wow. Well, I didn't know they actually named it, but let's see. Okay. No one's made any reviews on these. I was expecting some Google reviews. What the hell is this?
Is this Hwasong, by the way?
Yeah, this is well, this isn't Hwasong. This is apparently another place. I'm gonna keep my mouse near it. This one's north of Pyongyang near Chomsong Ni. So it's on up in the middle of nowhere, really, this one. So that's interesting. That's interesting. But also what's more interesting about it is that it's divided up. Oh. Dude, these are like falling in. Look at these.
Oh, yeah, those are rough. Like, it's hard to believe that's even really a building. It looks like not really a solid building.
Dang. Yeah, I think most of these are like collapsed right there. And then let's see. These over here, also very similar. Like, that one looks like it's devoid of a roof. All of the buildings are like that, except for this one. This one's actually kind of in okay shape. What the hell's up with the roofs? Like, it's like all of these buildings are like rotted. Like, some of the plots are just empty. Like, there's nothing there. Like, you can tell, like, they were just demolished. And then they have this giant, like, coal yard over here for no reason. And what is this? Apparently some kind of like a railway station or something, maybe where they bring them in. This is wild, though. Let's see. They don't really have a lot of vehicles either here. It's pretty much devoid of anything worth of note. It's just a massive... Oh, and wait a minute. So this is the Bukchon camp, and then this is the Kachon camp. So there's two totally separate ones.
So the Kachon camp, I have the information on that one right here. That's Camp 14. Apparently, the Kachon camp is unique because not only is it a political prisoner camp, but they also have the re-education center built into the prison. And we'll see. It also says it's located 12 miles to the southeast of the Kachon dedicated re-education labor camp. And apparently, it looks like they segregate the political prisoners from the re-education labor prisoners as well. Looks like they separate the two. Let's see here. It's been operating since the 1960s, and it's said to hold about 15,000 prisoners, all serving life sentences in Kachon.
That's interesting. But yeah, all these buildings are also in squalor as well. Like, most of them look like they're dilapidated and falling apart. These are okay, though. These are actually all right, a little bit. But
Yeah, you know, their newest facility is apparently the one in Chongjin. That's apparently the newest one there. It says the camp is well-maintained, high-functioning prison with light industrial factories. So apparently that's one of their newer ones in Chongjin.
I'll tell you this, though, man. It's a little weird to see this, though, that they're just, like, these almost, like, village-like houses that they're putting them in. I guess there's a lot of them, like, packed into each building. But you would think that it would look something like a prison, you know? Like... It's a little bizarre, and also I don't really see any, like, barbed wire or anything. It's just kind of, like, just houses.
Let's see here. I'll tell you. It looks like this particular camp right here has about 1,000 armed guards, heavily armed guards, that patrol the perimeter. So also they apparently do have barbed wire on the ground. You just can't see it from the satellite. So tons of barbed wire, 1,000 heavily armed guards, and also you have, of course, the re-education teachers who are just basically propagandists acting like teachers. So apparently a pretty hellish place.
It sounds like it would be hell, but let's see if we can find that one near Chongjin, further up north. Let's see here. There we go. There's Chongjin up here. And so I saw that somewhere on the map it made it look like it was somewhere out here. On this, like, side road heading around Chongjin. So I'm guessing that it's this facility up here, considering that they said light industry, and I saw this earlier. They have a classification.
That's actually not it, but I do have the coordinates for you in the live chat. It's a dedicated looking facility. Like, you'll definitely be able to recognize it when you see it.
All right, and so let's take a look at this. And
I think that's it up there, Camp 25, labor camp. Yeah, there it is.
It's like right there. It's literally just north. So let's see. I'm guessing that this is like a part of a town because that looks too, like, jumbled up to be a part of a specific facility. But now this one looks more like a prison.
Yeah, this is the new one, the freshest one they've got. It says here it has a population of 5,000 prisoners. Apparently, they have new guard posts, an air defense site at this facility, also a high-security wall building, a security area, and possibly a leadership memorial building added to the camp. And let's see here. It also says here that apparently the primary industry is focused on agriculture, livestock, and a furniture factory and a lumber yard. Like I said, it's a newer one of all the camps they have. And it looks like it only holds offenders and not the families as well. So this appears to be more like a traditional penitentiary or a traditional prison. And apparently it has normal cells in it like you'd find in any other prison around the world.
That's interesting. Yeah, because this one looks more conventional, like what you would expect. Also, I like the Gulag Service Road, as it was so aptly named in front of the camp. It's like, what a name. Like, I'm glad that we know the name of that road, the Gulag Service Road. But yeah, this one looks more normal. But do they have rail service, though? Because you would expect, it being North Korea and not having a lot of vehicles, there would be some local rail service. And there is actually. There we go. Suseong station. So I guess they just take them to the station. Dude, these stations are horrendous, man. Like, look at this. It's just dirt up to the tracks. And then there's, like, some, like, shoddily made platforms that look like they're at, like, foot level. They're not even at, like, platform level. And you just hop on the trains, I guess. It's a little bizarre, but I guess they just take them there and then just march them up to the Gulag, which wouldn't be that far away from that train station. So that is interesting. That's really interesting.
Also, another bad thing about this gulag in specific is apparently, according to NGO reports, it looks like The sole known camp witnesses testify that there are primarily solitary cells in the prison used for long-term prisoners rather than short-term punishment. So it looks like a large portion of this prison is basically solitary confinement, meaning in your cell for pretty much 23 hours a day, only out for about an hour or so, which of course that's been proven to drive people nuts, by the way, like drive people absolutely insane. And if they're being kept in there long term, but perhaps for life sentences, so that's quite bad conditions. And I'd assume they're probably not feeding them well either. And when they finally do get out, it's probably not a very good time for them either. So it sounds like these people are staying for a long time in pretty rough conditions.
It really does. And I would assume that it would be an absolute hell in there. But man, it's a pretty sprawling facility because there's a guard tower all the way up here. So I guess this entire area is within the control of the facility.
Must be, yeah, yeah. It looks like it says it's a 247 acres of land, so it must be extending into the mountains up there. They must bring them up there to do work.
Maybe like manage the fields that I guess are in their control. Also, they have a mine down here as well, and I'd assume it's a coal mine. But I don't really see any way for them to load the coal onto a train. That's usually how you would load coal. So what do they give any details about what this mine actually mines? Like, is it just rocks or something, or what do they mine here?
So it actually doesn't say on this report here about the mine. It doesn't mention that. It just says the primary industry is agriculture, livestock, a furniture factory, and a lumber yard. So the mine's apparently a new addition.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting, but still looks like hell, and very interesting to see where these places actually are, because I did not know where they were until today. But there are a lot of interesting buildings around here. Like, look at this weird, like, water feature thing that they have over here. I don't know what this is, and I don't know what purpose it serves. But it's surrounded by these little greenhouse-looking buildings, and also this little compound here. I don't know if that cannot be a water treatment facility. I don't know what that is, but that is incredibly weird. And then we also have, it feeds into the river, and then it goes down into Chongjin itself. And then you can see all the different rail yards that they have. And also, ooh.
Wait a minute. Wong came back. Wong, the North Korean, came back into live chat, the alleged North Korean. He said it's locomotive coal transportation.
Thank you, Wong. We are appreciative of your input, Wong. So apparently it's coal transport by rail. We can see some coal hoppers over here, actually, but it looks like it's carrying something else entirely, like some sort of bales or ballast or something like that in those cars. Where would the coal loading be done? Because I don't see any rail coal loading done in this area. You can see the, like, guard perimeter right here, but I don't see any, like, rail access to this mine. So I guess if they did anything, they would bring it out by truck to the rail or something like that. Not entirely sure, but you can easily tell where the North Koreans move coal, because apparently their coal transportation standards are abysmal, because it literally coats the areas black wherever it's moved. So we do know where the coal is being moved in larger numbers, and we just don't really see a lot of activity like that near that camp. So that is interesting. But I do thank you so much for the support and allowing us to go down such an interesting rabbit hole here. And thank you so much once again for enjoying this channel for quite some time and helping us to keep this thing running. Because if it was not for folks like you, Robert Massey III, we would not be able to answer the question about how one would know about nuclear testing and then go into this very deep rabbit hole about North Korea, which is one of those countries that we know a good bit about, because we would have been able to see that they were getting ready to conduct a nuclear test. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, everybody's saying, Wong, you have to tell us more. Yes, Wong, please tell us more. Tell us more in the live chat about anything, that is, anything you know. But moving on here to our next super chat. This one goes to Nathaniel Doggett, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Nathaniel, as well for that support. He said, is there not a reason to believe that should the Russians believe they are under legitimate nuclear threat, that they should preemptively strike Ukraine first, and the probability of a nuclear war in East Europe just increased, and mutually assured destruction?
That is a good question, and that's generally what I was trying to play out as a hypothetical scenario earlier. And there is kind of a bit of there's a little bit of an interesting thing with that, Nathaniel, because what I was trying to explain was the danger of nuclear weapons and how that could easily produce a terrible situation. It's not going to improve the situation. It can only make it worse in most instances. And I don't know what it is with this, and I'm going to speak very frankly on this, but a lot of people get blinded by their support of something. And we're always in support of the Western world and its interests, but it has limits. Like, it has practical limits to it. Like, I'm not going to say, because I'm in support of the United States, I think that what the United States has done throughout all of its history has always been right, and we've never done anything wrong, because that would be highly unrealistic and just plain wrong, in my opinion. And that's the thing that I was trying to explain a little while ago with Ukraine getting nuclear weapons, is that that's very easily the case. If the Ukrainians are starting to produce nuclear weapons, there is a reason for the Russians to want to nuke them, especially if they know that they're going to start working down that route. They could easily nuke the Ukrainians that are in Kursk right now. A lot of people don't get this, or a lot of people are, I don't know, like, I mean, I say a lot of people, but I'm really just talking about the people who were really verbal about this. People don't get the kind of implications behind what's being said. Like, yes, let Ukraine get a nuke, let them start working on one. I think it's just right, because yeah, you can think it's right, but there's implications and consequences that come with actions, even if they are right. And with the Ukrainians inside of Kursk, the Russians have a legitimate claim any minute now to drop a tactical nuclear weapon on those people and kill, well, most of them, or wound most of them, because by that definition, the Russians are in this existential crisis and a threat. And they could easily end up saying, well, the Ukrainians are invading our country, we're in some sort of a crisis, and we're going to nuke them. And so, going off of that, I would have to say also, sorry, really quickly, I got distracted there. I saw something just a second ago. But beyond that, 1 second, I actually got so distracted by that, I have to get back on course. But nevertheless, the Russians could easily nuke the Ukrainians inside of the Kursk Oblast when they hear that the Ukrainians are creating a nuke. They don't have to wait for the Ukrainians to nuke them. They have the justification to do that right now. And so, for that reason, with the Ukrainians saying we might develop a nuke, they're kind of giving the Russians the justification to ramp it up a notch in claim that it's a defensive effort. And I'm not talking right now in what is, unfair in support of Western interests. I'm talking about what would be claimed on the world stage on diplomatic level. And the Russians would say the Ukrainians were invading the Kursk Oblast. We could not push them out. They are threatening our sovereignty. They're creating an existential crisis of the state. Therefore, we nuked them. And that would be a legitimate legal claim. Like, no one could really counter that much. They nuked their own territory to get the Ukrainians out. And for that reason, there's not really a lot that anyone could do in response to that. That now means that the Russians have escalated this into a nuclear conflict. And now the Ukrainians, having been nuked, their armed forces having been nuked, even if they were in another country, even if Ukraine worked on a defensive doctrine, they now have the justification necessary to launch their nuke as soon as they develop it off the bat. This means that would not really go all too well for them, because they would have to launch the nuke now in response to what the Russians did. This means that it is now escalated into a nuclear exchange. And whoever has the largest, quickest available number of nuclear weapons to fire would end up being the winner of that tactical nuclear exchange, meaning the Ukrainians would come out shortchanged at the end of that. That is generally what I was trying to explain earlier, is that yes, it sounds like a good idea, at least in some instances or from some stances, for them to have a nuclear weapon. But when you really gameplay that in hypothetical scenarios, it just doesn't really end up that well. It just doesn't really, it doesn't really vibe well, if you know what I mean, with how things would actually turn out diplomatically. It does not work out. And that's what I'm trying to explain a little bit earlier, Nathaniel. But I would generally agree that it's, in my opinion, not a great idea unless if it's just a absolute necessity for them to do something like that, because otherwise they could start to create a very horrendous situation where it could turn into a full-blown conventional war across the entire continent somehow, some way, because then we have to get involved to respond to nuclear escalation. And then we see that it's an instance of mutually assured destruction. And a lot of people are very removed because it's never happened. And like, a lot of people are removed because no one's ever seen this. And we only have hypotheticals and supposed ideas to work off of here. But nuclear conflict is devastating. We assume that 2/3 of everyone living in the Northern Hemisphere would die in a mutually assured destruction exchange of nuclear weaponry. that is something that a lot of people, I don't think, understand when they say, well, yes, it would be fine for the Ukrainians to have a nuclear weapon going down this route. It's not to say that I believe that the Russians should have their way in Ukraine or that they're the only people who are allowed to have nuclear weapons, but there are serious consequences that have to be understood that everyone could possibly die. Oh, that's watching this channel right now if that path of action was to be made, depending on how that turned out. That's what I'm trying to make clear. Folks like Butchie, who are in the United Kingdom, could end up dead. I could end up dead. 2/3 of everyone in this chat right now statistically would be dead by the end of the year after a nuclear exchange was to occur. That's why when talking about nuclear weapons, it's a far more serious conversation than that of a conventional war. Or what can the Ukrainians do? Like allowing the Ukrainians to use our weapons long range inside of Russia. That's an easy no-brainer to me. I say that's fine. But that's not a nuclear weapon, so it's a lot easier to say that because we're not talking about something that could escalate into 2/3 of everyone watching this channel right now getting killed in a nuclear exchange. That could happen. So that's generally why I was trying to make that very clear and get out the severity and the importance of that, because I think that that's being missed by a lot of people because of the fervor and the support they have for Ukraine. They're missing the forest for the trees and understanding that sometimes things have serious consequences behind them, and something like that could have a serious consequence following it. So with that, I hope that does address that well, Nathaniel, at least the best way I can right now. And I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And also, let's see. Hang on. One second, Matthew. I'm trying to read this really quickly because you sent this to me. Oh, that is incredibly nice of him, man. That was a very nice comment right there from Brandon F. That's really cool. He's a stand-up guy. He's a great guy. But still, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And thank you so much once again for support, Nathaniel, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here is going to go to Corsair F4U, who puts in a $20 donation. That is 2 super chats, 2 $10 donations combined into a 20. And thank you very much, Corsair, because that was your first ever super chat on the channel, and also your third one as well. So huge shout to you for deciding to support the channel and our work, and we appreciate it. He said a good answer and third super chat ever, and take one from the chat. And also, I'm glad to hear the answer was somewhat good, because sadly, I hate it when we cannot get really deep into it, because sadly, it does get political, because I could answer the question, and honestly, I would answer the question. It's not necessarily a topic of interest for me, like necessarily about the European election systems, but I am aware of how they generally work, and also I have heard of the thing you were talking about, the proportional representation. So sadly, can't get into it, but I would love to. But thank you very much for that support.
And I got to thank you for the support as well. I would also have to agree with Matthew on that one, because it does end up getting somewhat political. And of course, we kind of just have to stand with what the United States does right now. I get the electoral college system. Just saying that outright, it makes sense when you actually know what the purpose of it is. No one explains it though, so you never really know why the electoral college exists or why it's important. But to explain it really quickly in the shortest amount of words I can, the electoral college system in the United States, not talking about that particular thing, but talking about how U.S. elections work for the president, the electoral college system is a good system, and I think it's one that deserves to stick around. The electoral college is not supposed to represent the popular vote, because generally the original idea when creating the Constitution and also creating the way that the presidential election was held was that it shouldn't be based off of mob rule. It should be more so based off of the representation of everyone. And the founding fathers understood that not everyone was going to vote out of the eligible voting population that there was at the time. And so they decided to create a system to where not everyone in a state would have to vote, but they would still have their state represented as though that was the will of every single person in the state. So they created the electoral college system. And the electoral college system has a specific set of electors that are representing each state that is representative of their population in percentage to everyone else. So, Alabama will have 7, like I'm just saying this hypothetically, I don't know the exact number of electors, but Alabama will have 7 and California will have 50, because that's how the population is apportioned. And so if only 30% of the people in California come out to vote and they all vote for Party A, all of the and they mostly vote for Party A, the elector's job is to say that the state's population wishes, out of the people who came out to vote, for Party A to win. So all of these electors represent everyone in the state, whether they voted or not, as in their population percentage compared to the rest of the country, and then they go forward and they cast their votes for the president. That's how the Electoral College works, and that's why it actually is not a direct kind of like mob rule kind of a thing with the vote. It's more so strategic with the Electoral College. I think it's a good system because it really doesn't incentivize people to just vote in mobs. It actually kind of incentivizes people to give a bit of a better look or be more educated when they go to vote. And, a lot of people may or may not like that idea. I'm generally a big idea of people being educated on who they're actually voting for instead of just mobilizing people to vote. Like, I think that's really bad if you just don't give people a reason to go vote and you're just telling them to vote just for the hell of it. I don't like that at all, and I think people should be knowledgeable on it. And the Electoral College largely ensures that disinterested citizens need not worry about voting or not, because the people who are interested enough in politics to decide to vote and decide to look into the policies at play and which one they support or not will go and vote, and those people will still be represented in the Electoral College one way or another. So in my opinion, I think that is a fairly decent system. And I see someone saying educated. Yet you laugh at that, but you're probably one of the people who would be considered educated considering that you go out and vote. And that's the big thing to me that I don't like is nowadays there's this huge push to mobilize people to vote. And I'll be honest, it's really degrading the political system because you have, in my opinion, and I'm just going to say this, if this comes back to bite me later, it will, but in my opinion, there's a lot of ignorant people that are being mobilized to vote that don't know what they're voting on, and then they try and get involved in the system, and they're so ignorant to how it works or how anything exists in this country beyond their daily life, they don't really know what they're talking about. And then the political system starts to pander to those people and their complete lack of understanding of anything of how this country actually works on an administrative level, and then it degrades the actual representatives, it degrades the office of the president. I believe it degrades the entire national system as a whole. I'm not really a big fan of just telling people to vote because it's their civic duty. It's their duty as a civic duty to vote if they're actually intelligent enough to spend the time to actually read about the policies and then discern which one they think is right. And and you can come up to either conclusion because knowledgeable people will always disagree, and that's the whole point of the election, is so that way the two parties that we have in this country can come together and one of them wins. One of them made a better argument to the citizenry than the other, and they will clearly win. But I think it's better for people who are too ignorant to be involved to not be involved. Like, I think that is far better for the system, because back when we had lower voter turnouts, but like I would say during the early 2000s, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, qualitatively speaking across the board, I think our candidates were better back then. Like, there were still scandals and everything like that, sure, but I still think that they more so spoke to the actual issues that affected the nation instead of the vapid hot topic kind of things that dominate politics nowadays that really don't have an impact on much of anything, but they still dominate public discourse because some of these people can't understand more complex topics, and so they go with the easier ones, and then that's low-hanging fruit for everyone to gather around, and then completely neglect the topics that actually matter. That's really my opinion on that, and you can just look at politics over the past 20 years and see that that's the case. We went from talking about, in this country, just across the board, I'm not saying that I'm in support of one thing or the other here, but we went from talking about maybe 30 years ago, a large deal in politics was trade, foreign diplomacy, the economic standing of the United States, job opportunities, things like that. And now we've moved on in 30 years later to those topics are sideshows. They're hardly talked about. They're even side notes almost, or just completely not mentioned. Now the hot topics are more so moral issues that are very arbitrary and don't require a lot of deep thought or calculation. It really just requires simple emotional outbursts, like what's your opinion on gun control, or another topic like the border or something like that. And they're things that generally they just require knee-jerk reactions. They don't really require deep analytical thought. And I'm saying that across the board. I'm not saying that taking a jab at one side or the other, because both sides now just harp on those things. They don't get off of them. They have two completely separate points, but they harp on them. And you never hear anything like how about, our policies with foreign nations? How are we going to deal with so and so or this and that? How are we going to deal with Taiwan? Those things are brought up as side points, and I don't think that's a good thing. And I generally am not going to blame that on the politicians, because the politicians that are running on these platforms and running on these topics because that's what the people want to hear, and that's what they're going to vote over. They're not going to vote over someone saying, I support Taiwan. Oh, to hell with Taiwan. We want to hear about what you think about the this one really hot topic, this really emotionally charging thing. We just want to hear about that and nothing else. And that's kind of my qualm these days. That's why when it comes around to this last election, I'm not really a big fan of telling people, go out there and vote, because it's like, why? Like, if you don't know what you're voting for and you're just being spurned to vote out of the blue for no reason, why do you need to vote? You don't even know what you're voting for. Like, for either side, like, if someone told you, oh, go vote red or go vote blue, it's like, do you even know what you're voting for? You're just voting for it because someone told you to. It's like, you don't even know what the actual policies are or how that might affect you. Because, like, your friend... like, so brat, so creep, it's like you don't even know what's going to be affecting you. Like, your friend might benefit for voting for the candidate that you wouldn't vote for, and you could still be friends, but you need to understand what's actually going to be affecting you and what you need to vote for. Like, that's an important thing in this country, and I feel like a lot of people are missing the forest for the trees. Like, for example, some people in Alabama would say, this is just an idea here, because, I guess you can say that this is a melding of politics and diplomacy. Some people would say that the Ukraine war needs to be cut off and the Ukrainians need to stop sucking from the American teat. And while they can say that, if they vote for that, it may not be in their interest, because a lot of defense spending is flooding into Alabama right now in the billions that would not be flooding into the state's economy otherwise. And so they can end up losing local people jobs and possibly throwing municipal areas in the state into a form of a recession, or maybe even a longer lasting regional depression. And that's something that isn't being considered. I mean, and then you have to look at that and weigh the pros and the cons. What would be better for me? Maybe you don't work in the defense industry. Maybe it doesn't matter to you, and so you don't vote that way, or maybe you need to vote another way. There's a lot of considerations that have to be made, and I'm not saying which answer is right or wrong here, but that's what people should be thinking. That's what people should be considering, because the reality on the topics nowadays that are brought up, like gun control, for instance, and I'll just throw this one out there. Gun control is a topic that is a very emotionally charged one, and it's emotionally charged either ways, because some people believe that they are just weapons of the devil, and some people believe that they're a sacred God-given right to keep. And regardless, either way you go, there's no real deep analysis there or discussion on that. It's just emotional knee-jerks, and it's just endless returns and cycles of that. And the truth is that compared as a topic, like, for example, let me say this. Economics is going to triumph that topic with the amount of people it affects, because you're always going off of the idea that policies should be having as much of a positive impact on as large enough a number of people as possible. The economic impacts will always impact hundreds of thousands of people. Gun control regulation, at best, whether it goes either way, is only going to be affecting a few extra thousand people. So then you're trying to weigh out the benefit of what's more important to actually push forward as effective policy. Should we be looking at economic sides of things that could affect millions of people positively, or should we be looking at gun control sides of things, which either way you go, it's going to positively or negatively impact only a few thousand people at a time? And so that's my kind of argument here. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that I'm pro-gun or anti-gun. What I'm saying here, though, is that kind of a policy is a non sequitur policy. Like, no matter what, it's a trivial thing. It affects a small number of people. Economic sides of things always affect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people at a time. So it should be elevated in importance simply because of the impact it's going to be having on so many people. And so that would be my take on that. That's why I think the way I do, and that's why I don't really get involved in modern politics, because I'm not on the same wavelength as modern politics. I talk about things that I believe actually affect the millions of people. I'm not really a political person. I more so focus on the citizenry itself directly and what would be the most beneficial for them, not the most beneficial for a certain political party. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, or at least why we go about things like that here on this channel. But still, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, and we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next one here is going to go to none other than Adam McLean, who puts in a $20 donation. And also, good to see you once again, Adam, and thank you very much for that $20 super chat,
Hey!
and we appreciate that support very much. He said, why are we seeing less Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil facilities today than we are in a couple of months ago?
Well, actually, we didn't really see a lot of strikes on oil facilities for a good bit, interestingly enough, at the beginning of this year. It's kind of coming in waves. Whenever the Ukrainians see the U.S. putting pressure on them to stop attacking those facilities, they roll it back. We're not really sure if they're getting any diplomatic pressure at the moment, but considering that it is being lessened a little bit, it honestly is starting to ramp up again, though. We think at some point there was another wave of U.S. diplomatic pressure applied to them that made them slow down those attacks, and that's why the attacks were not going at the frequency they normally have been. We think, though, that they're going to be ramping up into the end of November and throughout the entirety of December, though, given the current trend. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Rob McGuffin, who puts in a $14 donation. And thank you very much, Rob, as well, for the support. He said, it makes no sense for Ukraine to make this statement unless they already have nuclear weapons. And Russia has many nuclear weapons. And why would they be afraid?
And that is an interesting question. I generally would give the answer, Rob McGuffin, that the Ukrainians aren't really good with keeping secrets, so I think their strategy is generally just going out there with them. Like, hell, sometimes they even, kind of like hint that they're about to start an offensive before they start one. They've done that a couple of times. Like, for example, during the summer offensive of 2023, I remember this, man. Don't you? They were like, Budanov was like, the offensive is coming, blood will spill. And we were like, what? And then, like, 3 days later, they came out with that little video where everyone went, shh, in the video, like, for like 30 seconds. You remember
Yeah,
that?
that stuff's not clever. That
Yeah,
stuff's not clever at all. It's silly. It's breaking OPSEC for no reason, except for to make a big grandstanding moment. It's like this is war. Like I get the fact you got to do psyops on the enemy. That's all part of war, but not those type of psyops. Like publicity stunts. We're not marketing for like an energy drink or something like that, where you're trying to get as much attention as possible. You're trying to actually fool the enemy in a meaningful way to get them confused. So I just don't understand. Specifically, I don't understand why Budanov does that, because I think Budanov's the one behind all those schemes like that, and I've just never thought it's very logical.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing, but that's generally why I would say that. It's not that they already have them or anything. It's probably that they don't have them and they're actually considering making one here in the next few months, and they're just going to say that outright instead of just quietly doing it if they thought that they needed to, because that's generally how the Ukrainian government has worked in the past. Someone's about to say that we're anti-Ukrainian because we're saying something that's hardcore fact. Like, if that sounds bad, it is bad. Like, it's not something you should be doing, but that's what they do. And so that's why we would generally believe that they do not have one and they're working on one, because historically they always do that. Like, for example, with the Kerch Bridge being hit, Budanov at the beginning of this year said, they better watch out. They better not cry. They better not pout. I'm telling you why. Kerch Bridge is falling into the strait. And it's like, why would you tell them that? Because then they started building up their defenses like no other around the Kerch Bridge. It's like, if you hadn't said that and you made them think that you didn't deem it to be a strategic target anymore, it'd probably be a lot easier to hit. But then they tipped them off, and now the Russians have built up defenses so heavily that probably is the main reason why they're not going to attack it anymore, to be entirely honest. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. But even still, just to give you all an example, because a lot of people are used to the Ukrainian standard, because a lot of people are getting introduced to war here with the Ukrainian standard. The Ukrainian OPSEC is terrible. Like, I'm just going to be completely honest there. Like, we support Ukraine and we support American and Western interests, but their operational security is horrendous. It's some of the worst in the world. Like, for example, Israel right now is conducting pretty sizable ground operations in southern Lebanon. How much video and picture evidence do we get from that conflict right now to show? Over this entire week, we've only gotten 2 pieces, and one of them was the only physical footage we got from the ground. They've been at work the entire week down there. In some instances, the firefights have been getting as heavy as they are in Ukraine against Hezbollah, and nevertheless, we only have 1 clip to show for it. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, we have literally hundreds of clips, of I believe about 250 of them from this week alone, and that's heavily cutting down the clips we're showing on air compared to what's actually put out there of what's going on in Ukraine. Like, the operational security is almost not there. And so when we hear a statement like that, we know it's generally true because they just have that low of a standard of operational security that is probably a true statement and something that they're working towards. It's just that they generally don't hide that kind of stuff. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's generally how the Ukrainians operate on the operational security side of things. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for support, and I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, in our next one here, and also I see Alexander Nev said, it was your CIA guy that leaked the Israel plan. Well, I mean, you do have a point there. Honestly, you do have a point. Apparently, it was some CIA operating from Cambodia that apparently, allegedly, leaked out the Israel attack plan on Iran. I still don't know why they did it. I tried to do some research on that earlier today. I didn't read the actual charges that the guy's been charged with, but it sounds like maybe he had some type of personal vendetta, perhaps against Israel, and decided to try to screw them over. At least that's my assumption, because why else would you release that? But you're right. We do have some leaky folks occasionally in our government from time to time, but they tend to get caught most of the time, at least maybe 80% of the time, if I'm being honest, but most of the time they get caught. But anyways, jumping into our next one here, this one goes to Verna Weeks, who puts in a $14 donation, and thank you very much, Verna, for that support as well. Hey! They said, my first donation, if I couldn't remember my password, and hyph, I couldn't remember my password, ha.
And thank you so much for the support, and thank you for supporting the channel. And thank you for supporting the channel and helping it to keep on running. If it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. We wouldn't be able to keep it running. And I got to thank you so much for the support, Verna Weeks, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. But still, thank you so much once again for your first super chat ever. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Cliff H, who puts in an $11 donation, and huge shout out to Cliff as well for that support. And also, folks, please remember, no politics in the live chat, by the way. I'm seeing some politics over there, so please, no politics. But Cliff H puts in that 11 and says Ukraine was conned into giving up their nukes for security assurances that were not upheld.
I wouldn't say that they were conned. That's a really strong claim. They weren't conned. We did give them security assurances. The Russians violated the security assurances that they gave to Ukraine, and they invaded them. And our hands are kind of tied with that. I got to go through this again with this, but are we going to get nuked, and are we going to get 2/3 of everyone in the Northern Hemisphere possibly killed to enforce a memorandum that wasn't even enforceable in the first place? Probably not. Most likely not. And I'm sure you would agree, you don't want to die in a nuclear hellfire to stand up for that. And I'm sure that a lot of people here would believe that is a good sounding thing, and it sounds great on paper, and I can't disagree with that. But at the same time, there's a practical thing involved. So the Russians invade Ukraine. So what were we supposed to do in response? Britain and America were supposed to go, oh my God, Russia's invaded Ukraine, and our memorandum here says that we have to defend them. Well, let's go, guys. Let's go into a war with Russia. How would that turn out? It would not turn out well, I can tell you that. Because here's what would happen. We would curb stomp them. We would start pushing them into Russia. The Russians would get freaked out. They start flinging tactical nuclear weapons at our forces with proper justification. We start flinging tactical nuclear weapons back at them with proper justification. And once we level the Russian army with the tactical nuclear strikes, whatever we have left of the army will continue to roll forward deeper into Russia until they freak out enough that they fire off their intercontinental ballistic missiles. We fire off theirs. The British and the French probably also fire off theirs as well, because the Russians will also be firing at the UK. And then we see, once again, 2/3 of everyone in the Northern Hemisphere is dead within a year. And so that's a good idea on paper, that we should have backed them up and supported them. But we have to remember that the circumstances are not exactly the most ideal, and being able to respond with full force. That's the kind of a thing. And also I see Adventure Cammy saying the enforcer should really put himself in the Ukrainian people's shoes. I try, I'm trying, but also at the same time, I'm an American, and I have to put myself in our shoes here. Are 220 million people in America going to die so that way we can achieve, really in the end, nothing in Ukraine, because everyone would be mostly dead by that point in Ukraine and also in America? Does that really make a lot of sense? Not really. And also, another thing that I have to put out there is, by putting myself in the Ukrainians' shoes, am I supposed to say that 2/3 of everyone in the Northern Hemisphere is less valuable than Ukraine? That's in the end, that's kind of the metric that we're going to have to go down there, is how many people are going to die. And while there's a lot of people dying in Ukraine right now, and that's for sure, with U.S. and British involvement off the bat, backing up the memorandum against the Russian Federation, 2/3 of everyone in the Northern Hemisphere would be dead. I've got to keep pressing that number because it's an important one. And also, I saw someone say it can be caused by any country. Not really, because if the Belarusians had invaded Ukraine, that would be a very short and sweet answer. The United States and Britain come in to defend the Ukrainians from Belarus. It would have been very simple. But with the Russians involved, they're a nuclear power, so there's always the chance, well, there's a very high chance that if we get involved in a direct confrontation in them, it's going to go so badly for them, they'll have to launch nukes out of desperation. So that's the thing that we have to consider. And that's why we have to say, whenever we get into these hypothetical scenarios, the United States didn't con Ukraine. It's a situation that no one ever saw coming. Because when we all three agreed, including the Russians, to defend Ukraine, it was never considered that the Russians, being a nuclear power, would back out of the agreement and then invade the Ukrainians. So we're dealing with a situation here where our hands are kind of tied, where we can't really do anything unless we're willing to get almost everyone in the Northern Hemisphere killed. So with that, let's see. And here's once again the great question. Do you support Ukraine giving up against Russia? No, but I'm not going to also sit there because, like, I gotta make sure to answer this, like, as clearly. Like, I support Ukraine, but that does not mean that I'm one of those people who support Ukraine where I'm like, let's give Ukraine aircraft carriers, let's give Ukraine nuclear weapons, hell, let's give them the whole U.S. military. I'm not one of those kind of people, all right? Like, this is something that I've got to make very clear here. This is going, like, saying that they should have a nuclear weapon is going a little bit far. Like, that usually in most situations, that would become a little far. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, thank you once again for the support. And we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, by the way, someone said there's too many kids in this chat. And yes, I'm calling out this chat in the live chat here. And then I said, everybody here is about 40 plus. They said, I'm 33, LOL. I said, oh, you're the kid. Somebody said, I'm not 40. Someone said, I'm 22. Wait a minute, you're 22. Trapping Terps is 22. I think that's unusual because usually we don't have like people our age in the live chat. You're the same age as the Enforcer, so wow, how about that? That's a rare demographic on the channel. Like typically we're the youngest ones here, the ones hosting the channel. Like that's oddly enough. But yeah, very interesting. Let's see. Let's see. It said the guy said, "OMG, Matt, just chill. You tell people you're 25 all the time." No, I'm 24. I'm not 25 yet. Come on, man. Don't you age me an extra year. I'm not 25 yet. I'm getting there though. But anyways, moving on from that, we got to get moving on these super chats here. This one goes to Weatherby Studio, who puts in a $10 donation and did not leave a comment. But thank you very much, Weatherby, for that $10 support, and we appreciate it. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta thank you all once again for the support, because while you didn't throw in comments, y'all's support is absolutely incredible and helps us to keep this channel running. And so a massive thanks to y'all once again, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one here goes to Jeff Manji, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, Jeff, for that support as well. He said, is a truce even possible?
A truth, turn into Mike Tyson right there. A truth. But a truce is maybe possible, but not now. And it will not be soon. The Russians are already making that very clear. This war is going to be going on for a good bit longer. I would assume at least a year at a minimum, before any actual truce or peace treaties are made. So down the line, yes. And that's also something that I have to say as well, is that this war is not going to be a forever war. Like, this war isn't going to be going on forever and ever and ever without end. There has to be an end to it at some point eventually. And so with that in mind, yes, there is going to eventually be a truce in this war, but I don't believe it's going to be within the next few months, or at least within the next year. It's going to be further than that. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Jay Kai, who put in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Jay, for that support. I'm not gonna lie, like, I don't know if there's anything necessarily wrong with what you put in here. Like, honestly, and was no pun intended actually with that, like, seriously speaking. But I'm scared to read this one off for some reason. I don't know why. There's just something about this that's like making me scared to say it. But thank you for the support, though. We appreciate it. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta thank you so much for the support, J-Key, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And so with that, a big thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And let's see here. Hold on a second. I think Wong is back. Yes, Wong is back yet again.
What?
Wong, the North Korean person here who I believe is hanging out on Hub, is saying in the live chat here. He said, "No bird in America." Corbin. I'm not sure who Corbin is. I
Those are
don't
the
know who
birds
that is
that'll be
actually.
eaten on Tuesday.
No birds. Now, guess what, Wong? We have birds. We have lots of birds. We have sparrow. Well, we don't have the yellow spits over here, but we got the sparrow. We got the
And
we
that ain't
got
no bird. That's a
the
dog.
yeah, I know. I know. I'm just saying. I'm making that clear up front. We don't have the yellow spits. That's not on the menu. We don't have that. We have the sparrow. We have the crow. We got buzzards. If that's your thing, like we got plenty of buzzards. We got some blue jays. We got all the good birds, like the top birds. You know, the best birds. You'll never find a better bird like this than in America. The biggest birds, the best bird. I'm the biggest bird. But anyways,
I'm
outside
the
of that
biggest
rant right
bird.
there.
I'm the biggest bird.
But seriously though, we got the best birds, like no lie. Like North Korea's got nothing on our birds, and we're eating them on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But anyways, we're moving on to our next super chat here, which goes to Plazat, who puts in an $8 donation, and thank you very much, Plazat, for that support. He said, "Take a question from the chat in LSA."
And hey, and thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And we will make sure to take one from the live chat, and long live the LSA. And what do we got, Matthew? What do we got?
And this one goes to Bullseye Bob, who said, "Wouldn't Ukraine have to test its new nuclear device to even determine that it works?"
Technically, yes, they would. That's usually the standard, so yes, to answer that question in short. And so I hope that does answer that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one here goes to Nick Nelson, who puts in a 5. And thank you, Nick, as well, for the support. He said, CENTCOM says it launched precision airstrikes against Houthi weapons storage facilities in Yemen involving U.S. Air Force and Navy assets, like the F-35C.
And I did hear a little bit about that. There was not really a lot of video footage on the ground. I think we actually covered that when that happened a few days ago. And it was a bit of a side note because we didn't really have a lot to say, and we also didn't have a lot to show for it. But still, thank you for the support and sharing that info with us, because I believe that we did cover that. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and also, by the way, like I'm just saying, Wong, if you have a question for us, because I don't think Wong is really willing to volunteer much information right now. If you have a question for us, let us know, because I'll call it out. Whatever the question is, as long as it's nothing profane or anything like that, we'll call it out and we'll see what you got. But anyways, moving on here to our next super chat. This one goes to Ambi Pambi, who puts in a $5 donation and says,
Oh no! But beyond that, thank you so much.
And then Wong says, "What's that?"
Oh no, Wong, don't pull it up. Don't do it. But beyond that, thank you so much for the support. And thank you for throwing that in, because we always enjoy the Hawk surface-to-air missile system and the TUA air defense strategy. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Scott, who puts in a $5 donation. And thank you very much, Scott, for that support also. He said, "Great live stream and thanks, Enforcers. And how were you able to get that Ukrainian artillery crew to write say a message about the LSA and write it on a shell?"
Oh, they watched the show, and they liked it enough that they just offered to do it one day out of the blue, which was the cool thing about it. And so they were a part of the SignMyRocket.com crew, so they put the little watermark at the bottom to plug it and promote it. But still, they did it absolutely free, just because they watched the show and they enjoyed it, and they wanted to do something as a thanks to our channel. And so that's how it was done. It was done way back at the beginning of the war, I think, like almost 3 years ago at this point. But still, we've put it in the intro because we've always been so proud of that, and it's really cool. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to High C King, who puts in a $5 donation. Huge shout out to High C King as well for always supporting the channel. And they said, "Yeah, you ever heard of the Battle of Saltville?" And some say it killed the Confederacy, and it's super interesting. And I'm from near the area in Heisei.
And let's see. High C, Virginia. Where is this? Here we go. There it is. Damn. It's like one of those little towns. It kind of
No, they must be from Iraq.
Oh no, dude! This kind of reminds me of the town of Thurmond. Have you ever heard of Thurmond, Matthew, in West Virginia?
I probably have sometime or another.
Are you sure it's a ghost town, Matthew? No one lives there. Well, actually, some people actually do live there, but Thurmond.
Ghost.
Ghost! toast. But it's a really cool ghost town. See, the trains actually still run through, but it used to be an old railroad town built literally right along the tracks. Pretty neat. It's mostly empty now, though I think there's maybe 10 people who live here still, but the trains still pass through. It used to be a part of the Chesapeake and Ohio system, though. Still pretty
That's
neat.
what's another place that you'd have the Scooby-Doo car rolling through the street, and some guy in the corner of a abandoned hotel or something going, oh, oh.
Dude,
Oh,
I wish
God.
I could have shown you that meme where it was Elvis ordering in a McDonald's because he was like, "Can I get a haw? Can I haw?" And they're like, "Security!" And then they got him out or something like that. It was hilarious. But beyond that, though, I do want to say that that is an interesting little town right there, and I do thank you so much once again for the support and sharing that with us. That you're from the area around Heisey, or at least somewhere in that area, and so. Thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you for sharing that info with us. But beyond that, with the whole death of the Confederacy was dead pretty much from the start as soon as the war began because they did not have the industrial ability to carry out a war. It was a losing battle for them from the start. And while they were able to win some major battles at the beginning of the war due to really strategic prowess and really the fighting spirit, well, really actually the leaders that the Confederacy had for their generals was really the only reason they got any major strategic victories at the beginning of the war. But those were short-lived because even with the general incompetency of Union commanders through the earlier part of the Civil War, their industrial might and their logistical abilities would simply see through the day to victory, just for that reason alone. Once again, proving, folks, that it doesn't require amazing leaders and brilliant warriors on the battlefield. It really requires a strong industrial base to be able to win a conflict. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because I don't really think it was one particular battle that killed the Confederacy, at least in the Civil War. I think it was literally just their existence that doomed themselves from the start, not having any industrial abilities throughout the entirety of their nation. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have another super chat from Nick Nelson, who puts in a 2 and says German Irish tea to arrive in Ukraine by the end of 2024.
And that's great to hear. And I thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Burnaby Alex, who puts in a 2 and says, gentlemen, there is no fighting in the war room.
And that's a Doomsday reference right there. Well, actually, no. It's a Doctor Strangelove reference when they started fighting, and the president got up and said, "Gentlemen, there's no fighting here. This is the war room," or something like that. It was a really funny part of the clip. Honestly, that movie was a pretty good one. A weird, I will admit, but still good. And I would highly recommend if you haven't seen it before to watch it because it was very interesting. And they had this German scientist guy in it that was pretty funny. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you so much once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Jay Kai once again, who puts in a 2 and says Melanie was right.
Melanie was right. Right about what? The context is lost to time. I unfortunately don't know what Melanie was right about. But if we can figure that out, I will be able to concede.
What Melanie was right or wrong.
Raggy. But still, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Dark Warrior 137, who puts in a 2. And I don't know what this one's about, Dark Warrior. I don't want to freak people out in the live chat or anything like that. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for the support, and we appreciate it very much. And the next one goes to Jay Kai as well, who puts in a 2 and says Wong. And yes, that is Wong. He's in the live chat still. He's still lurking around, but he's gotten shy again. He's not saying anything, and he's just listening. Or he could have gone back to Hub. You never know. But anyways, our last one here goes to Wolfgang Olish, who puts in a 1, and huge shout out to Wolfgang as well for that support. And with that, folks, guess what? We are fresh out of Super Chat. So once again, if you've donated to the channel tonight, huge thanks to you. And also, if you haven't donated to the channel tonight and you simply smack the like button, huge thanks to you as well for that. Because, of course, it helps to keep the channel running, and it means a ton to us. And with that, we're now moving on to our live chat questions. So, Enforcer, do the thing.
And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into our live chat questions. Before we do, though, I do have to make a quick note that the stream is getting a little long. And while that would generally be perfectly fine, I do have to get up extremely early in the morning to be able to deal with the Armed Forces medley, as I, for some reason, put an accent on the armed in Armed Forces. But nevertheless, we are going to be making sure to grab a couple of those incredible live chat questions and the Morse code decoders of the stream. And so with that, Matthew, what do we got?
And this one right here is the Morse code decoders of the stream. And tonight we had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J, Paul Schultz, David Millsaps, Royal Fluffiness, and Arabelle Garbo. They said the Morse code for today reads, to be a Russian is to be threatened with nuclear war out of the blue and to rebel against your command. LLLT, LSA.
And ding, ding, that's the sound of money.
On the petty cash.
That's petty cash, my boy. But beyond that, that's the sound of money. You know, I got that dead on the nail, and I gotta congratulate y'all for that because it's really impressive. And that's just petty cash. But with that, we're on to the third to last question of the night.
And also, by the way, just in case anybody's wondering, why do they keep saying petty cash over and over and over? That's a reference to Scrooge McDuck. I don't know why, but all of a sudden the Scrooge McDuck like financial literacy courses are starting to be sold on YouTube. Like, that's a joke, by the way. Apparently, they're making the rounds on the shorts for some reason, and I've seen several of them, and it's like the goofiest thing ever. It's like Scrooge McDuck trying to teach finances to these little ducks. And it's a Disney thing. It's like an old cartoon, but that's what we're talking about. But anyways, moving on to our next live chat question here. This one goes to Avari Mandabratis, who says, what makes you think that Ukraine doesn't already have a deployable nuclear weapon?
The reason why Ukraine does not have a deployable nuclear weapon is that they had announced that they had it. They wouldn't say that they're going to think about it or start moving towards making one. They would simply just say that they had it now. And that's the reason why we believe that they don't have one yet. And so with that, I hope that does address it fairly well, at least the best I can. And with that, we're on to the second to last question of the night.
And also, it is true, like, when something makes the rounds on the shorts, everybody gets to see it. It looks like a lot of people, including David in the live chat, said, yeah, I've seen that too, that Scrooge McDuck, like, finances thing. I don't even know what the hell's up with that. It's literally Scrooge McDuck. Like, honestly, Scrooge McDuck had some good financial advice. I showed it to my mother, and she was actually intrigued by it. Like, she didn't really look at the part where he was talking about petty cash. Like, I was trying to get a laugh, but she actually, like, started listening to the finances. I was like, wait a minute, are you trying to actually get financial advice from the duck? And she said yes. So I was like, okay, I guess the duck's got something to say. But anyways, moving on to our next live chat question here. This one goes to Glock Glock, who's there. Channel legend, by the way, and says Russians were killed or wounded every 49 seconds, and it was every 44 seconds the day before. And do you think these will continue?
I think it will continue. I actually think it'll be increasing in frequency as the months roll by, because it looks like that is now the ongoing trend. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. But before we do, I was able to find petty cash. So let's see. Let's see, hang on.
I hope we don't get got for this one, because I think this might be, who's copyright lawyers.
Well, I think if we only play like a few seconds, it falls under fair use, I believe, at least in this particular instance.
I'll sort of just like talk a little bit over it when you play it, just a tad.
Okay, all right, here we go.
This is just petty cash.
Petty cash.
This is just petty cash. But beyond that, I hope that does let y'all hear the clip. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. So who is the lucky last person who put in the lucky last question of the night?
All right, and this one is going to go to, I'm just looking through here to make sure I'm getting one that is very, very original, because it looks like I had a lot of questions about the nukes here. Let's see here. So it's going to be a question about the nukes again. It looks like pretty much all my live chat questions are about the nuke. This one goes to AF Kaplan, who says, assuming Ukraine could develop a nuke, would it more likely be a tactical nuke as opposed to a long-range one?
It would most likely be a tactical nuclear weapon, or it may be a smaller strategic nuclear weapon, although it would be quite small. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, Fat Man and Little Boy, were fairly small in kiloton yield compared to our modern counterparts to those weapon systems. And so we would generally believe that they would be smaller in yield and not that big, even if they were strategic. We believe, though, that it would most likely be tactical, because they would most likely be aiming, if they had to use it in a tactical situation. So we're expecting it would most likely be tactical in nature, or strategic, but on a very, very low yield scale. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, it is time to round out this stream for the night. I've got to thank you all once again for watching the stream tonight. If you have enjoyed it and you have greatly appreciated this wonderful, glorious stream, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. We'd be incredibly happy to have all of you here watching this channel each and every day. Hopefully we put out some good news for you. I would hope so, bless my soul. But nevertheless, thank you all so much once again for watching, and we will see you tomorrow, maybe in the Short Wars summary, if we're able to make one, or during the next night's stream at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Least Spring Army. The Least Spring Army will never die.
And with that, folks, once again, thank you all for another great stream tonight. About 57,000 people have tuned in by the end of the stream to take a look at the news for the night, and we do sincerely appreciate it. And also, 2,800 people smashed the like button, and we also appreciate that very much as well. So, with that, we're going to see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern on the next Night of War News streams, and also, the Enforcer is actually going to see you midday tomorrow on the Short War video if there's enough news to cover. But with that, guess what, folks? It's time to end the stream, so Slava Ukraine, Hiram Slava, get some rest, and we'll see you tomorrow, and good night.
Yes.